Good evening, everyone. It's very nice. It's like being back at school. Welcome to the December 2023 Ordinary Council meeting. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the traditional custodians of this land, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and their elders past and present. I would like to advise everyone that the audio of this meeting is being live streamed to YouTube, and I request everyone to please turn off your mobile phones. I remind you that audio recording of the meeting proceedings and photography within the chamber is prohibited unless prior approval has been granted, and councillors and city officers are reminded to disclose any declarations of financial interests and interests affecting impartiality, and are requested to activate their microphones when addressing the meeting. So that brings us to item 1, which is the declaration of opening. I declare this meeting open at 1 minute past 6 p.m. Councillor Mary Choi has requested to attend tonight's meeting via telephone. So, in accordance with Regulation 14C and 14C of the Local Government Administration Regulations 1996, I've authorised Councillor Choi to attend the meeting by electronic means. Councillor Choi, in accordance with Regulation 14C subsection 5 of the Local Government Administration Regulations Act 1996, can you maintain confidentiality during the meeting and when the meeting goes behind closed doors?
Yes, I can, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. We move on to item 2, which is a disclaimer. The City of South Perth disclaims any liability for any loss arising from any person or body relying on any statement, discussion, recommendation or decision made during this meeting. Item 3 is announcements from the presiding member. That's me. There's no such announcements this evening. Item 4 is attendance. We have no apologies this evening, and we do have Councillor Glenn Cridland has an approved leave of absence for the period of 11 December 2023 to 30 January 2024 inclusive, but I have been informed that he's getting through traffic at the moment and he will be with us presently. Item 5 is declarations of interest. So we've got a few this evening, so I'm going to ask you all to bear with me. Councillor Nick Coveney has declared an impartiality interest on item 10.2.1 for the reason that, like I did with most business owners on Angelo Street and Menn Street during my election campaign, I briefly met with the owner of Next Door. Similarly, like I have with most cafes and restaurants on Angelo Street and Menn Street, I've previously eaten at Next Door. Councillor Jennifer Navard has declared an impartiality interest on item 10.2.1 for the reason that some of the local regular customers of the local business in the vicinity of 79 Angelo Street and some of the traders are known to me. I undertake to vote in accordance with the interests of the entire city. Councillor Hayley Prendeville has declared an impartiality interest in item 10.3.1 as some of the staff at Wesley College are known to me. Councillor Bronwyn Moore has declared an impartiality interest in item 10.3.1 as my son attends Wesley College. Councillor Mary Choi has declared an impartiality interest in item 10.3.1 for the reason that my husband is a Wesley College old boy and our sons attend Wesley College. Councillor Jennifer Navard has declared an impartiality interest in item 10.3.3 as I am a ward councillor for Moresby and Kensington forms part of that ward. I undertake to vote in accordance with the interests of the entire city. Councillor Hayley Prendeville has declared an impartiality interest in item 10.4.4 for the reason that I have a family member who is a member of the Collier Park Golf Club, and Councillor Jennifer Navard has declared an impartiality interest on item 10.4.4 for the reason that I know a number of golfers and active lobbyists who use Collier Park Golf Course or have campaigned in the interests of the golf course. The course is in Moresby Ward, for which I am an elected member. I undertake to vote in accordance with the interests of the entire city. Councillors, is there anyone else who would like to make a declaration of interest this evening? And that's a no, so we'll move on. That brings us to item 6, which is public question time. Item 6.1 is responses to previous public questions taken on notice. There's nil this evening. And item 6.2 is public question time itself. So just before I open public question time, I'm going to let everyone know that we have received 9 sets of public questions this evening. I do note that some of those questions we've received have some fairly lengthy preambles, so I'm just going to give everyone a really gentle reminder that public question times is for questions only. It's not a forum for debate or making public statements or expressing personal opinions. We absolutely do allow that, but that's during deputations, and the time for deputations was last week at the council agenda briefing. So I have to be fair to everyone. I'm going to ask anyone who has a preamble of more than a couple of sentences to please reduce their preamble as much as they can. And if I ask you to proceed to your question, please do respect that, because we've got to get through all the items tonight. So with that, I open public question time at 6 minutes past 6 p.m. And our first person asking questions is Mr. Barry Drake of South Perth. Welcome, if you'd like to come to the microphone. And Mr. Drake, just before you begin, I do note that you've attended almost all of the ordinary council meetings this year, as you're welcome to do so. But if I include the questions they're about to ask tonight, you will have asked 20 public questions all on the same topic. I do think you've been given a pretty fair opportunity to ask questions about your issue, and I see that the questions that you're asking tonight, which I'm going to allow, they are repetitive and they are similar to questions that you have asked in the past and have been answered. I'll also caution you that your questions shouldn't reflect adversely on the city or the administration. As you know, I advised you in October that the standing orders do allow me to rule that any questions that have already been answered are out of order. And I understand that you've spoken with the City of South Perth CEO and you've been advised that the appropriate pathway to deal with your issue is via the State Administrative Tribunal. I am going to allow your questions tonight, but I do want you to know that after tonight, I will be applying the standing orders more strictly. So with that, please proceed with your first question.
My name's Barry Drake. I live at Unit 3, number 2, Scenic Crescent, South Perth. Good evening, Mr Mayor. Good evening, councillors, officers, members of the gallery, which are a lot here tonight. That's good. And everybody listening on YouTube. Good evening, Mike. My questions are about the way the city has charged some landowners the undergrounding, or the cost of the undergrounding of the power lines in the South Perth Hurlingham project area. Question 1, who is being dishonest with me?
Okay, Mr. Drake, no adverse reflections on the City of staff. You don't need to make any allegations of dishonesty to ask your question.
Well, Mr Mayor, I was going to put the word lying in there, but I didn't.
Mr. Drake, I'm not arguing with you.
Okay.
Please ask the question without reflecting adversely on anyone.
Okay. Is it the Ombudsman or the City of South Perth when the Ombudsman advised me in writing that the city informed this office, and that was the Ombudsman office, that you lodged this matter with the State Administrative Tribunal on the 29th of November 2022. And the City of South Perth advised me in writing that they didn't.
Thank you for your question. Mr. Bradford.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Mr Drake. And as we had a chat down by the river last night, and you agreed that you knew that we have previously advised you, we've got no record of providing advice to the Ombudsman, and that is pretty clear. There's no correspondence from the Ombudsman, and if they phone us, we don't know who they may have spoken to, and we've asked. And you know that, and you've agreed that that's the position. So to be clear, that means we're unaware of anyone that's actually spoken to the Ombudsman and provide that advice. As I've discussed with you now on a number of occasions, this matter that you're pursuing around underground power, the proper channel for that is to go through the State Administrative Tribunal, and I suggest that you do that.
Well,
Thank you,
Mike,
Mr Bradford. Your second question, Mr Drake?
It's unfortunate the City of South Perth doesn't have that record because the Ombudsman does.
Mr Drake, I've been
Anyway,
very
question
clear.
number two.
Question 2, please.
Question number 2, why did the city charge me 8 underground power connection fees for a building that had 1 connection? Was this a mistake?
Thank you. Mr Bradford?
Thanks for the question, Mr Drake. As you know, that matter has been discussed with the administration on a number of occasions, and if there was an error, it was corrected, and that has been dealt with. And you acknowledged this at SAT. You've been charged in accordance with the council resolution as applied to other property owners within the scheme area. I'll reiterate that this matter is really, if you want to address it further, it needs to be with the State Administrative Tribunal.
Thank you, Mr Bradford.
Question number 3, if the answer to question 2 is yes, then is it possible that the same person could have made a mistake when charging flat owners the network charge? Or was it price gouging as advised to me by Jeff Baker?
Mr Bradford?
Thanks for the question, Mr Drake. No mistakes have been made, as you've been previously advised, and rather than coming to council meetings, if you wish to challenge your charges, as I've advised you tonight and previously, the appropriate forum is to do that via the State Administrative Tribunal.
Thank you, Mr Bradford, and thank you, Mr Drake, for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor.
I would now like to invite Mr Peter Scott of Como. Welcome, if you'd like to come to the microphone, and we look forward to your questions.
Good evening, Mayor and councillors. In tonight's agenda item, 10.4.4, about golf course management services at Collier Park, council officers are recommending that the Chief Executive Officer be authorised to negotiate with Club Links to finalise a course controller agreement. Before this decision is made, I ask the following questions. Has the city produced a comprehensive risk assessment plan that covers the financial, commercial, legal and reputational risks associated with the proposed lease of Collier Park Golf Course, along with any mitigation strategies that should be provided for in the final contract? And will this risk assessment be made available to ratepayers before any details are finalised?
Thank you, Mr Scott. Mr Bradford?
Yep. Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks for the question, Mr Scott. Given that the exact details of the proposal are still to be worked through, that is negotiated with the proponent, subject to council approval, and the capital funding requirements are still to be sorted out, the city will work with its lawyers to identify all relevant risks and ensure that the final contract addresses any identified issues. This is normal practice with regard to contracts of this nature.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. Your second question, Mr Scott?
Question 2. The officer's recommendation includes background notes that claim the city estimates it would need to spend approximately $15 million over the next 5 years to replace and improve assets at Collier Park Golf Course, ensuring it remains financially viable community asset. Can you please provide a detailed account of these items, including the cost estimate and an explanation of why these assets need to be replaced or improved?
Thank you. Mr Bradford?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks for the question, Mr Scott. The facilities that are identified within that cost estimate to be renewed or improved include the driving range, which is currently uncovered and relatively small, the kiosk, the clubhouse, the administration facilities and the pro shop. Note that these things all would have been addressed by the Recreation and Aquatic Facility Development Project if that had have proceeded.
Thank you, Mr Bradford. And your third question, Mr Scott?
Oh, sorry, there was a request for a cost estimate there.
Mr Bradford?
The question's pretty clear. It says, can you provide a detailed account of the items included in the cost estimate?
Okay, fine. Question 3, in relation to this item, the council agenda briefing meeting last week, the CEO commented that the golf course is a commercial operation that is run to derive a return for the city and therefore needs to make a commercial return. This appears to be at odds with the fact that the golf course is a community sporting facility, much like bowls clubs, tennis courts, football ovals and other sporting facilities within the city, all of which are provided for the purpose of enhancing community sport and recreation and are not considered commercial operations. Why should the golf course be treated differently to other sports? And are these facilities also at risk of being used to become money-making ventures?
Thank you. Mr Bradford?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Mr Scott. I don't think golf's being treated differently to other sports. I think I note that the council's direction, which I think was supported by COSPRA, with regard to the recreation and aquatic facility, was that it should not be subsidised by rates and so should stand on its own. So similarly, ensuring that the golf course is financially viable ensures that the City of South Perth ratepayers are not subsidising what we estimate to be 80% of the users who currently come from outside of South Perth.
Thank you, Mr Bradford, and thank you, Mr Scott, for your questions.
Thank you very much. I just note the $1.7 million profit the golf course makes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Scott. I'd now like to invite Mr David Bassel of South Perth, if you'd like to come to the microphone. Welcome, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Good evening, councillors. I'm referring to the Sir James Mitchell Park Wesley Sports at the Elm Street end of the park. In the mid-1990s, Wesley tried to use the same area that is under consideration today for junior sport, namely cricket and soccer and hockey. An artificial turf cricket pitch was constructed and both were abandoned as the grass surface was unsuitable for both sports, and neither the council nor Wesley were prepared to fund remedial work. The cricket wicket has also been removed.
I've got to be fair to everyone, Mr Bassel. Could you proceed to your questions now, please?
Sure. Given the previous unsuccessful use of the area, what will be different this time?
Thank you. Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. The area has been used in the past for playing sports, as you've identified, and I understand it was largely unsuccessful due to the seasonal inundation of the land. So the proposed feasibility study would include a geotechnical investigation to determine any modifications required to the surface, as well as any necessary drainage infrastructure to facilitate development for sports spaces.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. And your second question, Mr Bassel?
Has the council canvassed other areas to use for sport? For example, the bottom of Coode Street opposite Wesley, or Collier Reserve, for example?
Thank you. Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the reason that this area is being considered for the feasibility study is that it was identified as an area for outdoor sporting infrastructure within the South Perth Foreshore strategy. The node at Coode Street has also been identified for informal activities and sports such as kayak launching, volleyball and swimming. But many other active reserves throughout the city have already been developed for sports spaces. So this would be an investigation to see whether we could provide an additional sporting space to what's already provided throughout the city.
Thank you, Ms Shaw, and thank you very much, Mr Bassel, for your questions.
Thank you.
I'd now like to invite Ms Jo Ord of Como, if you'd like to come to the microphone. Welcome, and we look forward to your questions.
Evening all. So these questions relate to the previous speaker's topic, actually, at the Elm Street end of St James Mitchell Park. So I realise that a proposed spend of $50,000 isn't really exorbitant for a feasibility study. However, during a residents' deputation last week, it was stated that this feasibility study seemed to appear on the agenda rather out of the blue. So it isn't evident at item 7.2.1, concept briefings and workshops, if a workshop on the proposed fee study was provided to councillors prior to this appearing on the agenda. And given that a number of elected members are new, could the city advise if it did in fact conduct a workshop to provide all elected members the history of previous dealings in this area, the details of the in-principle proposal from Wesley, and the intent of the city's South Perth foreshore strategy?
Thank you, Ms Ord. Ms Shaw, can I send that one your way?
Yes, thank you. So no workshop was specifically held on Elm Street. However, a workshop was held with the elected members on the 19th of July 2023 on community recreation facilities, which did identify the growing need and demand for sports spaces within the city. In respect to the newly elected members, they were also briefed on the matter during the Development and Community Services Directorate induction, which was held on the 14th of November 2023.
Number two, the city has stated that the feasibility study would include investigation and analysis of all relevant site considerations, including but not limited to geotech, environmental, operational, financial, community and stakeholder engagement, civil design, traffic planning, turf and irrigation requirements. I believe others previously have raised concerns that a 50K budget will not produce a meaningful or useful report, and I share these concerns. Could the city advise if the proposed feasibility study is a desktop study only, whereby results provide simply an indicative BCE and any engineering assessment is conceptual only, based largely on assumption and historical data?
Thank you. Ms Shaw?
Thank you. So the 50K estimate has been based on recent feasibility studies that have been undertaken throughout the city. And the city is confident in the figure given the investigation is for one site only and would not involve attendance in multiple sites with various site conditions. For example, a recent geotechnical investigation was undertaken at George Burnett, and the figure for that was between $6,000 and $7,000, just to give an idea about what some of the technical components of the feasibility would include. Should council approve the allocation in the mid-year review, the city would actually go to market to shore up the actual cost. So we intend to undertake a complete feasibility study, not just a desktop audit. And to do this, we would need to engage the services of a suitably qualified consultant to undertake that work. However, various components of the feasibility study could be undertaken in-house. So for example, the city intends to undertake community consultation in-house as part of that.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. And just before you ask your third question, Ms Ord, I do note that 15 minutes have expired, so I'm using my powers under the standing orders to extend public question time for a further 15 minutes. If we need a further 15 minutes beyond that, I'll need to put that vote to council. But for the time being, we've got another 15 minutes. Ms Ord, please proceed with your third question.
Can the city advise if a prelim order of magnitude of project costs has been established by either party, the city or Wesley, such that it may have assisted Wesley in determining that an in-principle contribution of up to 1.5 million would be fair and reasonable, given their proposed exclusive use of these facilities during times when other schools and community groups would likely wish to conduct the same or similar activities?
Thank you. Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So no project costs have been established by either Wesley College or the city. The intent of the feasibility study is to determine the likely costs for development of the site for sports spaces. So we would have a better indication through the outcome of the feasibility. In terms of Wesley College, so Wesley advised that it was prepared to contribute up to 1.5 million, although that would need to be considered against the actual total project cost following the outcome of the feasibility study in determining whether or not it was appropriate for even the city to consider proceeding with development of the site for sports spaces. So we don't know what the actual eventual cost would be, which is the intent of the feasibility. The times that were requested by Wesley in the letter, which is contained as the attachment to the agenda, are Wesley's preferred times. And it would be open to council to negotiate with them or any other community group for actual usage as part of consideration for any future licence should the site be developed for sports spaces. It's probably worth noting that any reduction in hours for Wesley we could assume result in a lesser contribution towards the development for sports spaces.
Thank you, Ms Shaw, and thank you, Ms Ord, for your questions. I'd now like to invite Mr Bruce Bunton of Salter Point. Welcome. There you are. If you'd like to come to the microphone, we look forward to your questions. I do note you've got a couple of lengthy preambles here. If you can, I've got to be fair and consistent with everyone, so if you can cut those down, I'd be very grateful.
Yep. Good evening, Mr Mayor and councillors. I'll do my best to shorten that, but it is a bit technical.
Have a go, but if I say proceed to the question, I will ask you to respect that.
Okay, I'm Bruce Brunton. I'm an architectural designer and I reside in Letchworth Centre Avenue, 45 Letchworth Centre Avenue, which is down the road a bit from the Letchworth Commercial Centre. And my questions the presentation tonight is about the recent DA that's been approved for a cafe and restaurant, a second one at the Letchworth Centre. Now, I've seen a lot of the correspondence from the planning department via our local councillor, and one thing that stood out was that the planning department seemed to believe that, technically speaking, the application was exempt because of conditions under the State Planning and Development Regulations 2015. And on that basis, I'm concerned that the DA was not subject to the same scrutiny as an application that was not already assumed to be exempt from requiring a DA. And the reason that I say their advice...
All right, Mr Bunton,
Yep.
I've probably given you as much rope as I can.
Okay,
I'll
sure.
get you to move to question one.
So that is question one. How can we presume that the same scrutiny was applied to this DA assessment when the planning department was under the assumption that it would be exempt potentially under the state planning regulations?
Thank you.
When in fact I don't believe it is.
All right. Ms Shaw, can I send that in your direction?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. So the application wasn't exempt. Clause 61 of the planning regulations provide for exemptions where a cafe or restaurant is up to 300 square metres and it's a discretionary land use. The intent of providing that information to the elected member was to highlight that under the future planning framework, under draft local planning scheme number 7, the use would be permitted, or if the area had been reduced to 300 by excluding the storage component, it could be considered exempt. But the city did not exempt it. We accepted the application and we assessed it in accordance with all of the regulatory requirements.
Can I comment on that at all?
No, I'm sorry. It's
Okay.
comments and statements, just so
Okay.
everyone knows, that's at deputations the previous week at council agenda briefings. So I'll get you to move to question 2, please.
Yeah, well, I might have if I got a letter about this. So question 2, it's my understanding there were 7 objections lodged after this application was advertised. Now, given the recent history of the Letchworth Commercial Centre where we had a parking chaos due to an unapproved speech therapy business that was operating there, I'm concerned that the orderly operation of the Letchworth Centre is not properly considered, and given that it impacts more broadly on the whole...
Again, Mr Bunton,
Yeah,
I've
on the
got
whole
to cut you
Salter
off.
Point
You're engaging in debate. Could you move to
Sorry.
question 2, please?
So question 2 is, why wasn't this application advertised more broadly to the whole community of Salter Point?
Thank you. Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So just in regards to the comment about the previous land use, each development application needs to be considered on its individual merits. If there was occupation of a tenancy there without development approval in the past, that's a compliance matter, and we need to treat this application based on what they've applied for. So we don't consider previous occupation of land uses by a separate tenant. In terms of the consultation that was undertaken for the application, consultations undertaken in accordance with local planning policy, advertising of planning applications. Because this application is what's known as a standard application under the planning regulations, we're required to advertise to the adjacent and abutting owners on occupiers, which is what has occurred.
So again, I can't comment.
Well, no, it's not that forum. Just before you move on to question 3, Mr Bunton, I can see you've got quite a few points in your preamble here. I can assure you that the officers have seen that and they're aware of the background to the question you're about to ask.
Okay,
But I will ask that you go straight to question 3 without the preamble.
all right. Well, given the 4 points I made about parking and the previous questions, it's against this backdrop that we ask whether the particular DA process has been totally compromised when the city's planning department incorrectly assumed it to be exempt from serious DA scrutiny because of the state planning and development regulations.
Thank you for the question. And Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, so as I've previously advised, we accepted it as a development application. It wasn't exempt. Current town planning scheme number 6 provides for certain concessions for car parking. One of those is a 15% reduction where you're in proximity to public transport, and I can appreciate that residents may not feel that people would use it, but because we have to assess a development application in accordance with the scheme requirements, the applicant is entitled to that concession being applied to the car parking ratios.
Can I ask one more question?
No, it's 3 for everyone, Mr Bunton. I do have to be fair.
I'd just
but-
like to know what would happen if parking isn't as you assume.
Well, Mr Bunton, what I might suggest is make an appointment to meet with one of the officers, and I'm sure they'll be very happy to either speak with you on the phone or meet in person, because you've clearly got concerns.
Yeah, I appreciate that,
No problem at all.
but nothing's going to change, is it?
Well, thank you for the questions.
Thank you.
I am going to now invite Ms Naomi Smith of Salter Point. If you'd like to come to the microphone, welcome, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, councillors. So my queries relate to the same matter. So I put it to you that the DA process was confusing, and I say that to start with because the correspondence used several different addresses: Lot 2, Unit 2, number 20 to 21, Lot 2, number 20 to 22, 2/20. The building is marked 22. Most people assumed 20 was Rectocino's, and they were putting in the building in the DA, which would have been welcome. Okay, so my first question is, I also believe this was defective process because how can the council be sure that they received all the submissions, as there was clearly website issues? Not one person I know of was able to submit by the link on the website as when instructed in the letter. The 7 submissions, I suggest, probably all came from email because I can count.
Ms Smith, I might.
So
You've asked the question,
yep,
how
sorry.
can the council be sure they've
how
received
can
the
be sure
submissions?
that
I might-
they received all the submissions when the link wasn't working?
I'll give Ms Shaw a chance to answer that now.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we received 7 submissions, as you've identified. They were from the website, mail and email. We went through the back end of the system once we were aware that there was an issue with lodging online with our business systems to make sure that any ones that were in the back end of the system were captured and provided additional time to make sure that we'd received those submissions. We also received a late submission from the Salter Point Community Group, and we considered the matters that were contained within that submission when considering the application. But I think it's important to note that when it comes to planning submissions, we're not counting, it's not a poll effectively. So it's not based on how many submissions are received. It needs to be based on whether the content of the submission are relevant planning considerations. And so the matters that were raised within those submissions, for the most part, were relevant planning considerations, and they were considered as part of the assessment, parking being one of those.
So question 2, why was the parking calculations not taken into account for to include the alfresco dining and also their wholesale and retail business, which will create further traffic and has a lot more square meterage?
Thank you for the question. Ms Shaw?
Thank you. So similar to the previous response, when we're considering planning applications, we need to consider it against the scheme requirements. So for a cafe restaurant, the way that we calculate car parking is based on 1 per 5 square metres of dining area. And so some of the alfresco dining areas for this and the adjacent businesses are actually contained within the city's road reserve. But on the site, it looks like it's the car parking bay for the Letchworth Centre, but it's actually road reserve. So we do one calculation that's based on the on-site parking provision, which is some of the garages that are provided at the back and some of the bays. And then we also consider the availability of adjacent and on-street bays, which are those that are contained on the side streets and what looks like it's the car park for the centre. Hopefully that makes sense.
So no alfresco included in, basically, is what you're saying. Question 3 is how can a correct acoustic report be conducted prior to commencement when there's no patronage?
Thank you. Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So this is a standard condition that's applied on development approvals, and what's required is that a qualified acoustic consultant report undertakes noise modelling based on predicted noise levels undertaken by the consultant, and then they shore that up against the actual operation to the satisfaction of the city. So there's assumptions contained within the noise regulations about what the level should be for that business. But in any instance, the city has environmental health officers that can undertake noise monitoring, and we have the equipment for that to ensure that they are compliant with the noise regulations moving forward.
I say dust them off. Thank you.
Thank you for your questions. Okay, I'd now like to invite Ms Elizabeth Urbanaic. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
Thank you.
Welcome, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you all. I'm speaking on the same subject. So one question, I probably don't need to say very much because it's all the same. One question that I would like to know, how did the delegate determine there was a surplus of 5 bays when there are only 15 on-site bays and the requirement for all tenancies is 40 plus, being that Rakachina's al fresco wasn't included, and also that the bays behind the shops, which are full of sand, were added into the calculation?
Thank you for the question. Ms Shaw?
Thank you. So the city determined that there was a shortfall on the site of 6 car parking bays. So in terms of how we consider car parking shortfalls, car parking is considered in relation to the on-site bays as well as the adjacent bays that are available. Under the provisions of Town Planning Scheme number 6, discretion is available to grant development approval for non-residential land uses, proposing a lesser number of car parking bays than what is otherwise prescribed in the scheme, provided that the total number of bays is sufficient, having regard to peak demand generated by the use itself, the other existing tenancies that are at the Letchworth Centre, and any opportunities for reciprocal or on-street car parking bays, which is a separate calculation. And so it's quite typical for older centres such as the Letchworth Centre to be developed with no car parking that otherwise supports the tenancies, which is not necessarily commensurate to the current scheme requirements for what car parking would actually be.
Okay, I have a letter here that I would like to lodge in relation to that parking, which I would dispute, lodging a complaint and an
I
investigation.
might have to cut in there. Please, by all means, email that through.
Sorry?
But, I'll cut in here for 2 reasons. One, by all means, send that letter through, absolutely, but this isn't the forum to be talking about it.
Fine.
And the second point is that the latest lot of 15 minutes has just expired, so
Can
I'm
I
going
just
to...
ask 2 brief...
Oh, and of course, I'm just going to move a motion that we extend public question time first so that you can do that, but I have to do that first. It's under the standing orders.
Okay.
So I'm going to move a motion that public question time be extended for a further 15 minutes. Could I have a seconder for that motion, please? Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillors, please cast your votes.
Okay, was
Oh,
Salter...
hold on. We've got to do the vote first.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Oh. Sorry.
And Councillor Choi, which way do you vote?
Yes, thanks.
All right, so that was unanimous. Apologies for the interruption. Please do proceed with your next question.
So my question 2, was Salter Point Community Group Incorporated submission and concerns considering that they were not received before the decision was made?
Thank you. Ms Shaw?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. So as I mentioned before, we did receive the late submission from the Salter Point Community Group, which was received after the application had been determined. But the content that was contained in that submission, for the first point, The submission actually supported the application, but it did raise concerns with respect to car parking. And so we had considered the car parking in the course of the assessment under the scheme and in relation to the parking concerns that were raised by other submissions in any instance.
Excuse me, I'm a member of that group and we did not support it.
Ms Urbanag, you may well be right. I haven't seen your submission, but
I just want it on record that the Salter Point Community Group did not support it.
I'll take that. But again, public question time really is just for public questions. So your final question?
Now, question 3, will the City of South Perth guarantee resident safety when entering and exiting their properties, considering that the parking is chaos already around that area?
Thank you for your question. Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So any on-street parking throughout the district needs to be in accordance with the city's parking local law. Obstructing a driveway or parking on a verge without the adjacent resident owner's consent is an offence under the local law, which the rangers can enforce.
Thank you, Ms Shaw, and thank you for your questions.
Thank you all for your time.
And folks, just one more gentle reminder that public question time really is for public questions. I'm pretty lenient, but I do have to enforce the rules. So with that, I'd like to invite Mr Robinson Elliser. Have I pronounced your surname there correctly?
Yes.
Brilliant. Welcome, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor, councillors, and everyone present here this evening. My preamble is parking issues on Letchworth Centre Avenue, Salter Point. In the last few months, there has been an acute parking problem on Letchworth Centre Avenue. With the approval of this new cafe, Coffee Connection, it may become untenable for any of my family members or visitors parking in the marked bays opposite my house. They will be forced to park on the side streets away from my home. Also during the evening and weekends, when the Cafe Rattachino's is operating, there is absolutely no parking available along the entire street adjoining my house. I would strongly recommend that this approval should be looked at again in its entirety. Now, my question is, what is the council going to do to address my parking concerns?
Thank you for the question. Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So just in terms of the preamble, once a development determination has been issued, it's final. Unless the applicant made an application to the State Administrative Tribunal, there's no ability for a further review of the decision that's been issued by the city. In terms of the parking concerns, we've had some recent discussions with the Salter Point Community Group to do with some parking concerns around Redmond Reserve. And as part of that, the city's undertaken a commitment to review the parking restrictions more broadly, and we will include the Letchworth Centre and the surrounding streets as part of that review to consider whether or not there needs to be additional on-street parking restrictions.
We already have parking restrictions to our parking limits.
Again, Mr Elliser, it's not a forum to for debate. No, please. Mr Elliser, I'll turn off the microphone if I have to. Now, I think that was, you just had the one question.
Yes, I had the one question,
Yeah.
and I thought I would get a reasonable answer, but I'm getting a
Mr
very
Elliser,
unreasonable
please,
answer.
it's not a forum for back chatting or well, I'm going to give someone else a turn now, okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'd now like to invite Ms Cecilia Brook of South Perth. Welcome. If you'd like to come to the microphone, we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My questions are regarding the parklet. As a frequent client of the Shops on Angelo Street shopping complex, and after discussing this with many of my neighbours and very many concerned people who frequent these shops, I ask the following questions. 1, Mr Olsen states in his letter that Coles Local provides over 150 public car bays, 3-hour free parking, which is only 100 metres from the proposed site. My Google search tells me that it is 200 metres, which is a 400-metre return walk to the Coles car park. Undertaking this on a 40-degree day or in the pouring rain would be a huge inconvenience,
and would deter people from shopping at the Wesley end of the Angelo Street precinct. And I'm wondering if this aspect of Mr Olsen's letter has been considered.
Thank you, Ms Brooke. Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So all submissions and officer responses to the content of the submissions have been included in the attached schedule of submissions, and that includes those submissions from Mr Olsen.
Thank you. Question 2. Does the city intend to monitor any adverse financial impacts on nearby businesses during the 12-month period, not after?
Thank you. Ms Shaw?
Thank you. So should the application be approved by council tonight and should the applicant seek to renew the licence, the city intends to undertake further consultation seeking feedback on the impact of the proposed parklet, and that would include any financial impacts.
Thank you. Question 3, in relation to fees, when questioned during the agenda briefing meeting, Ms Shaw stated that the councillors can decide to enforce a fee, presumably via an alternative motion. Is this correct, please?
Thank you. Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor, that is correct. As it relates to the alfresco dining fees, there's no fee structure at the moment for proposed parklets. However, any alternative motion would have needed to be submitted to the CEO by 12 noon yesterday in accordance with the city's standing orders local law.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I would like to wish you and all councillors, Mr Bradford and all the city staff, a very, very happy Christmas and a wonderful new year on behalf of all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Brooke, and thank you, Ms Shaw. And our final question is from Mr Keith Shorthill. I hope I've got the name right there, of South Perth. Welcome, if you'd like to come to the microphone, and we look forward to your question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors. Well, the question, I'll get straight to it. It's to do with the Collier Park redevelopment. And I'd like the question to be, the question is council aware that one of the tenderers for the redevelopment of Collier Park Golf Course does not require any council contribution towards the capital expenditure of this development, and that this tenderer has been advised that it is not the preferred tenderer? And if so, on what grounds does council select an alternative tenderer?
I might fire that one to Ms Amprimo, but was there a reference to confidential information there, or?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Due to it being a commercial arrangement that's currently under consideration, I'm not in a position to discuss the details in any particular submission. However, what I can say is that council were given a briefing on all of the submissions, and the capital investment proposals and mechanisms in any of those submissions are only one component of what is considered in the evaluation and would not be the sole determinant of what was recommended to council for approval.
Thank you for the question.
I don't think that's an answer to my question, because I'm not asking for breach of confidentiality, but
No, I hear what you're saying, Mr Shorthill, but that's the answer you've been given, and there are commercial aspects here, confidential commercial aspects.
I understand that, but the question was not answered at all.
Thank you for your question. Ms Amprimo?
Yeah, I have confirmed that council were given a briefing, and I believe your question was, are council aware of what was in the submissions? And they were provided a briefing on the submissions.
So you are aware?
Well, I'm moving on. Alrighty, so that brings us to item 7, which is confirmation of minutes and notes. Item 7.1 is the minutes. Item 7.1.1 is the ordinary council meeting held on 21 November 2023. So I'm about to look for a mover and a seconder that the minutes of the ordinary council meeting held on 21 November 2023 be taken as read and confirmed as a true and correct record. Could I have a mover, please? Councillor Brenda Abrandis, thank you. A seconder? Councillor Prendeville, thank you. Councillors, does anyone oppose this item? Councillor Choi?
No.
All right. Well, if no one opposes it, then I'll simply use my powers under the standing orders to declare it carried unanimously. That brings us to item 7.2, which is notes of briefing. So I'm about to call for a mover and a seconder to move that council notes that the following briefings and workshops were held. The first is 7.2.1, concept briefings and workshops, and 7.2.2, council agenda briefing, 5 December 2023. Could I have a mover, please? Councillor Coveney, thank you. A seconder, Councillor Brenda Abrandis, thank you. Does anyone oppose this, councillors? Councillor Choi?
No.
All right, then with no one in opposition, I'll use my powers under the standing orders once again to declare that carried unanimously. That brings us to item 8, which is presentations. Item 8.1 is petitions, and the City has received the following petition. 8.1.1, opposition to parklet proposal at number 79 Angelo Street, which has 126 verified signatures. So I'll call for someone to move that council note the petition received by Kayleen Cousins of Angelo Street, South Perth, has been considered by the officers in accordance with item 10.2.1 of this agenda, in accordance with clause 6.9 subclause 2 of the City of South Perth Standing Orders local law. Could I have a mover, please? Councillor Brenda Abrandis, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Coveney. Does anyone oppose this, councillors? No? Councillor Choi?
No.
No? Well, once again, I'll declare that carried unanimously. Item 8.2 is gifts or awards presented to council. That's nil this evening. Item 8.3 is deputations, and deputations were heard at the council agenda briefing held on 5 December 2023. So that brings us to item 9, which is the method of dealing with agenda business. I wish to advise that the following agenda items are new reports and were not presented to council at the council agenda briefing held on 5 December 2023. Those are item 10.4.1, listing of payments, November 2023, and item 10.4.2, monthly financial statements, November 2023. I'll now seek confirmation from the Chief Executive Officer, Mr. Mike Bradford, that all the report items contained in tonight's agenda were discussed at the December Council agenda briefing. Mr. Bradford.
That is correct, Mr Mayor, with the exception of the 2 items that you noted.
Thank you very much. So, with the exception of those items to be withdrawn for discussion, reports will be adopted by exception resolution. And by this I mean the officer recommendation will be adopted as is, without any discussion or amendment. So the following items have been withdrawn so far. Those are item 10.2.1, which is entitled Proposed Parklet, Next Door and Olsen Butchers, Angelo Street Road Reserve, abutting number 79 Angelo Street, South Perth. And the reason for that is Councillor Coveney has an amended motion and Councillor Choi has an amended motion as well. Item 10.3.1 has also been withdrawn. That's Sports Spaces Investigation Feasibility Study, Sir James Mitchell Park, South Perth, Elam Street End. And the reason for that is Councillor Glenn Cridland has an amended motion. We've also withdrawn item 10.3.3, which is Proposed Use Not Listed, Short-Term Accommodation, Lot 1, Unit 1 of 31 Banksia Terrace in Kensington. The reason for that is Councillor Bronwyn Waugh has an alternative motion and also an amended motion, I understand. Item 10.4.1 is listing of payments for November 2023. That's being withdrawn this evening because it's a new report. And we've also withdrawn item 10.4.2, entitled Monthly Financial Statements November 2023. And once again, the reason is that's a new report. We've also withdrawn item 10.4.3, the City of South Perth Annual Report for 2022 and 2023. The reason for that is an absolute majority is required. And also item 10.4.5, which is entitled Policy P669, Elected Member Continuing Professional Development. And the reason for that is, once again, an absolute majority is required. Item 10.4.4, which is tender 8 of 2023, golf course management services for Collier Park Golf Course, was the subject of a deputation last week. Does anyone wish to withdraw this item or any other item for discussion this evening? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Could I please have 10.4.4 withdrawn and also 10.5.3 annual financial report?
All right, just give me a moment there, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. All right, so we're also withdrawing item 10.4.4, entitled Tender 8 of 2023, Golf Course Management Services for Collier Park Golf Course, and item 10.5.3, 2022/23, City of South Perth Annual Financial Report. So any others to be withdrawn for discussion? Councillor Cridland.
10.5.5, please, Mr. Mayor.
All right, policy review. So bear with me. And we're also withdrawing item 10.5.5, entitled Policy Review. Any other items to be withdrawn this evening, councillors? Councillor Choi?
No.
All right. So I'm about to call for a mover and a seconder to carry the following items by exception resolution. They are item 10.3.2, South Perth Activity Centre Plan, Community Benefit Contribution Framework Annual Review. Item 10.5.1, Terms of Reference, Audit Risk and Governance Committee. Item 10.5.2, 2022/2023, Annual Financial Statements, External Audit and Information Systems Final Reports. Item 10.5.4, Internal Audit Report, Integrated Planning and Reporting Framework. And item 10.5.6, Audit Register Progress Report, Quarter 1. Could I have a mover, please? Councillor Coveney, thank you. A seconder, Councillor Brenda Abrandis, thank you. Does anyone oppose these items? Councillor Choi?
No.
No? Okay. Well, if no one's opposing, I declare those all to be passed unanimously using my powers under the standing orders. So for the benefit of those in the gallery and those listening via YouTube tonight, those items that I've just listed have been passed by exception resolution in accordance with clause 5.5 of the City of South Perth Standing Orders Local Law 2007, and the officer's recommendations have been accepted by council. So we'll now be moving on to those reports identified to be withdrawn for discussion this evening. That brings us to item 10, and more specifically item 10.2.1, which is entitled Proposed Parklet, Next Door and Olsen's Butchers, Angelo Street Road Reserve, abutting number 79 Angelo Street, South Perth. Now, there's two amended motions that we've received on this item. The first in time was for Councillor Nick Coveney, but I've also received one from Councillor Mary Choi. Councillor Coveney, if you would like to do so, you can move your amended officer recommendation rather than us having to move the officer recommendation first. If you would like to do that, let me know, and please read the officer, well, the part of your amended motion that amends the officer recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I seek to move the officer's recommendation as amended at paragraph 1G. In the first sentence, I've included the word at all times. In the second sentence, I've removed the word at all times and added the words outside the applicant's business hours of, and in bullet points, Wednesday and Thursday, 3 p.m. to 10 p.m, Friday, 12 noon to 11:30 p.m, Saturday, 12 noon to 11:30 p.m, and Sunday, 12 noon to 6 p.m, the effect being that Next Door has the exclusive use of the parklet during their hours of operation.
Thank you for that. So now I'll see if there's someone willing to second your motion. That's Councillor Ward. Thank you very much. Councillor Coveney, if you'd like to give your reasons now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In 2019, the City of Perth trialled its first ever parklet on Hampton Road outside a food shop, and to measure its success, foot traffic was captured and an online survey was conducted to evaluate public and trader perceptions. The feedback after that trial was that 89% of people enjoyed that parklet and 67% of traders agreed that it increased visitation. The foot traffic data showed an increase of 35% foot traffic on Thursdays and a 20% increase on Fridays. It brought more people into the area, it encouraged them to linger longer, and it actually increased exposure to other local businesses. It was a surrounding success. Now, the idea of parklets is not a new concept. Multiple parklets exist in other inner city entertainment precincts, such as Subiaco and Leederville, without issue. Subiaco, which for years was known as Dullsville, was recently voted the most livable place in Australia in the 2023 Australian Livability Census. Looking locally, in its strategic vision, the city has identified Angelo Street as one of several hubs it wants to activate. The city itself cannot simply choose the businesses on Angelo Street because the properties are largely privately owned. However, the city does have levers to pull through policy, which make those areas more attractive to particular types of businesses. A parklet is one of those levers. In the last 3 months, I door-knocked almost every household in South Perth, and one, if not the single biggest issues raised by locals to me, was the lack of activation on Angelo Street in the afternoons and evenings. Residents want small wine bars and restaurants. Residents want alfresco dining. I campaigned on that issue and received almost 2/3 of the vote. What better endorsement that the community wants this activation and alfresco? And the feedback that I received on the doors is reflected in the community survey that we specifically received about this parklet, with almost 2/3 in support. That support is overwhelming. There appears to be two broad concerns from critics of this parklet. One is the safety and two is the parking. In relation to safety, I don't accept that scooters or bicycles are using the footpath. I live on Coode Street. I visit Angelo Street every morning and night. I've never once seen a scooter or bike use that footpath. In any event, if they were, they shouldn't be there, and that's an issue that's unrelated to a parklet. I don't accept that those using a parklet are in danger of being hit by a passing car. As noted, parklets have operated for years in other entertainment precincts without issue. If a parklet was not there, there would be a car. Are those cars being hit by passing cars? No. And of course, parklets, unlike cars, don't have wheels and blind spots. The owner of Nextdoor indicated in his deputation that the structure has bollards and a sturdy steel frame. If people are genuinely concerned about that issue, they can exercise their right and not sit in the parklet. I do not accept that a parklet will cause a ruckus on the street, and I would suggest that those making that point have in fact never been to Nextdoor. Nextdoor is an upmarket restaurant and wine bar. It sells steaks for $250. In 2023, there are only 6 other restaurants in the whole of WA with a higher chef's hat rating than Nextdoor. The parklet actually improves safety by way of having passive surveillance on the street. And in his deputation, the owner indicated he would have CCTV cameras and more lighting. In relation to parking, whilst the parklet proposed is across 2 car bays, it's next to a car bay which needs to be extended, which would be taking one of those car bays anyway. So we are in effect arguing over a single car bay. The car bay itself is located directly outside Olsen Butchers and Nextdoor, i.e. the very businesses which would be impacted the most in having it taken away, and they want it. Whilst I acknowledge the petition, I have serious concerns about the accuracy of the statement put to those signing it. Namely, the petition asserts that there are only 55 car bays for 33 businesses. On Saturday, I personally went to the effort of counting the number of car bays. I counted 371 car bays, not including the street parking along Coode Street, Strickland Street, Forest Street and Waverley Street nearby. In other words, 7 times the number of car bays alleged by the petition. Of those car bays, 68 of them are in the section of Angelo Street where the parklet is being proposed, being the Coode Street traffic lights to Waverley, and there are only 9 other businesses in that section. There is also vacant land behind those shops, which in time, if the landowner wanted to, could convert those into 16 or so more car bays. When we look at the feedback channel run by the administration, as I say, 2/3 of the community were supporting those formal channels. The reality is we live in an inner city suburb. We need to be promoting alternate modes of transport and creating a faster turnover of car bays. Nextdoor is next to a newsagent and a kebab shop, and yet the street parking is 2 hours.
It's
Councillor
never-
Coveney, I'm so sorry, I've got to interrupt there. That's 5 minutes. I will move a notice of motion that you be granted an additional 5 minutes. Could I have someone to second that motion, please? Councillor Brenda Abrandis, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes on a motion that Councillor Coveney be granted a further 5 minutes. And Councillor Choi?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm just waiting on one more vote. Hopefully it's not mine, because that would be embarrassing. Governance? Oh, Councillor Coveney, and you're entitled to vote for yourself.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right, that was unanimous. Sorry for the interruption, Councillor Coveney. You have another 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As I was saying, we need to create a faster turnover of the car bays we have. Next door is next to a newsagent and a kebab shop, and the street parking is 2 hours. I've never taken 2 hours to eat a kebab or buy a newspaper. The benefit to the surrounding businesses by way of having residents sitting in the area and taking in their surroundings and noticing that other stores exist and then shopping at their store far outweighs the loss of a single car bay. So my amended motion is simple. Let next door, who's going to the effort and expense of building, installing and maintaining the parklet, have use of that parklet during their trading hours. They wanted the parklet to offer long table meals for larger groups. Having a non-patron sitting in the parklet during trading hours impacts that possibility. Patrons who are going to next door are going to the effort and paying for a particularly bougie vibe. Let them enjoy that vibe without interruption. And of course, by making it exclusive use during operation, we ensure that unaccompanied children are not sitting in the parklet next to adults enjoying a glass of wine. Next door largely operates in the afternoons and evenings, being times when the surrounding businesses are largely closed anyway. It becomes public at all other times. So in conclusion, what better option could the city ask for in terms of helping it achieve its strategic direction of activating this precinct? A family business with a 20-year history in South Perth, achieving statewide recognition and providing locals with the very service they're pleading for. By approving this parklet, we are not only signalling to residents that we are listening, we are signalling to other small wine bars and restaurants that South Perth is open for business. By approving this parklet, we are aiding South Perth in becoming a premier dining destination in Perth, to rival Subiaco, Leederville, Mount Hawthorn, Mount Lawley, many of which already have these parklets operating successfully. By becoming a premier dining destination, we elevate our city. And what do you think that does to our house prices? What is before us is a trial of 12-month only, which is a sufficient amount of time to collect data. This could be the start of a level up of South Perth that we have all been waiting for. Vote for progress, vote for what the overwhelming residents support whom we're actually elected to represent. Vote yes for the parklet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Coveney. Councillor Waugh, you're the seconder. Would you like to add something?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I'm speaking in support of this amended motion this evening to permit the proponent to have exclusive use of the parklet during its hours of operation. I can confirm that I am aware there is generally quite broad support for this type of development to occur, being the activation of the precinct, and I have also carefully considered the objections together with the loss of what is 1 or 2 car parking bays, together with the hours of operation of the proponent and the surrounding businesses, and the investment that is required by the proponent in undertaking such a development. I am aware that the application is also conditioned for a 12-month period for which a licence will be granted, during which time the city is able to obtain a good assessment as to the benefits and any concerns of the community and surrounding businesses with regard to this development. In accordance with the city's economic development plan, the city is aiming to encourage users that improve the nighttime economy and promote the streetscape and public realm improvements reactivation. I am of the view that this development fits squarely within that plan, being located within the Angelo Street Centre, and this will assist to activate the nighttime economy and promote the streetscape within the area. In circumstances where the local government are intending to encourage these uses, then it must do something to encourage those uses. In this regard, permitting a proponent to have exclusive use of an area for which it will have invested a considerable sum of money to create and is required to maintain, I think it is only appropriate that the proponent be afforded the opportunity of exclusivity during its hours of operation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Now, councillors, I am aware that Councillor Mary Choi has also submitted an amended motion, so I'm going to give her the opportunity to move that amended motion now. But just so everyone's on the same page, the current substantive motion is Councillor Coveney's motion in front of you at the moment, and assuming that Councillor Choi wants to move her amended motion will be amending what you see from Councillor Coveney in front of you right now. So with that, Councillor Choi, did you wish to move your amended motion?
Yes, okay, Mr Mayor.
All right, I'll just see if you could read out your amended motion, perhaps focusing on where yours is different from Councillor Coveney's motion.
Yes, so the amendments are at 1A, changing the licence period from 12 months to 6 months. Then at 1G, keeping Councillor Coveney's change there at all times. And paragraph 2, removing and alfresco dining fees. So only waiving licence fees, not the alfresco dining fees.
All right, so just to clarify, Councillor Choi, what the substantive motion that before us at paragraph G it's different from what you've got here. The current one reads, the applicant does not have exclusive or uninterrupted use of the area at all times. The parklet must be publicly available outside, and this is the part that I'm going to be asking whether you're changing or not, outside the applicant's business hours of Wednesday to Thursday, 3 p.m. to 10 p.m, Friday, 12 p.m. to 11:30 p.m, Saturday to 12 p.m, 11:30 p.m, Sunday, 12 p.m. to 6 p.m. Are you retaining the current drafting that is in Councillor Coveney's motion?
Sorry, Mr Mayor, only part of it. So that first part that you read out, so as it reads, the applicant does not have exclusive or uninterrupted use of the area at all times, full stop. Then the parklet must be publicly available at all times as per the officer recommendation.
I see. All right. So just to summarise, because it's a bit difficult with you not being in the chamber, the changes you're proposing can be summarised as follows. At paragraph 1A, the reference to 12 months becomes 6 months. At paragraph 1G, the existing paragraph in the substantive motion gets deleted and replaced with the paragraph G that is in your motion. And at paragraph 2, the words "and alfresco dining fees" be deleted. Have I understood that correctly?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor.
All right. So that's the motion you're moving. I'll now see if anyone wants to second your amended motion. Councillors, does anyone wish to second Councillor Choi's amended motion? Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillor Choi, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So my reasons are, 1, the application is for a commercial purpose and as such should be dealt with on commercial terms, with the applicant treated the same as every other neighbouring hospitality business, which are required to pay alfresco dining fees for outdoor service. 2, it is the view that the only reason the applicant is not being charged a licence fee is because one does not currently exist for parklets in the city's fees and charges schedule. This could easily be addressed in the new year during council budget review and fee deliberation process. And 3, in lieu of a parklet policy, any unforeseen implications or impacts of the trial, including on neighbouring businesses and residents, can be minimised with a 6-month trial instead of a lengthier 12-month trial, with a review and report back to council at that time. There are plenty of examples of local governments who have successfully undertaken 6-month parklet trials. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Councillor Brenda Abrandis, you're the seconder. Would you like to speak?
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. The amendments proposed by Councillor Choi are quite reasonable. I think the reduction of the licence period from 12 months to 6 months is appropriate, given that this is the first time we're actually going to be applying a proposed parklet in the city. If it works well, it'll be working well through the finest weather period, and we should be able to determine, whether this is successful and to consider an extension to a licence. So I think that's highly appropriate. The other couple of amendments as well are appropriate. So the exclusivity with regard to the area that's proposed as an amendment, I think that's appropriate. I suppose the difference between Councillor Coveney's part obviously identifies the business hours where it is actually publicly available outside of those times. I'm not sure that that is really necessary, given that the patrons would probably be the highest users of the parklet, but it should maybe also be available for other users. So for that reason, I'm quite comfortable with Councillor Choi's amendment, as I am with the removal of the alfresco dining fees. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. So councillors, just to make sure everyone's on the same page, we're currently debating Councillor Choi's amended motion, and depending on how the ultimate vote on Councillor Choi's amended motion goes, then we'll go back to the substantive motion. So the debate should be confined to the amendments being proposed by Councillor Choi. So with that, is there anyone that wishes to speak against Councillor Choi's amended motion? Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Next door are going to the expense of constructing this parklet. It's the first of its kind in the city, and we should be promoting this sort of innovation, not stalling it. 6 months is an insufficient amount of time in which to get proper survey results. And as I note, my 4 points for having the exclusive use during operations: protect the vibe, protect the purpose, and protect the children.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in favour of Councillor Choi's amended motion? No. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak against? Oh, sorry, what did I say? Oh, my bad. Yes, is there anyone who wishes to speak in favour of Councillor Choi's amended motion? My apologies, councillors. No? Is there anyone else who wishes to speak against Councillor Choi's amended motion? Councillor Navard.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, the only comments I'd like to make is that that particular business location was quite problematic for a long time. And on those grounds, I think we should give this proposal as much encouragement as we can. And I don't think a 6-month trial is reasonable. Given that we won't have gone through the entire weather features of the year. And as well as that, I think, well, there was some other aspect. Yeah, and I do think that it's not unreasonable to do some constraints around the business when it's in use, as far as the patrons go. So that will be it.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. Councillors, Councillor Brenda Abrandis, you're asking a question because you have spoken in favour of, okay, please ask your question.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Could I just have clarification on whether this proposal will consume 1 or 2 parking bays? I've heard 1 and I've heard 2 parking bays, and a second question, just an indicative estimate of the...
So I'll let Ms Shaw answer your first question and then you can ask your second question. Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So the plans show 2, but I think reference to the reduction to the bay is because the adjacent universal bay needs to be extended for disability compliance, and that would otherwise equate to a portion of one of the bays being consumed to provide for the extension to the length of that bay in future anyway.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. And your second question, Councillor Brenda Abrandis?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I actually now have 3 questions following that response. Thank you, Director Shaw. With regard to the Acrod Disability Bay, is that going to be impacted at all with regard to reduction or shortening of its space?
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No, so the bay at the moment retains its current width at 2.3. When you factor in the location of the parklet within the existing bay, they have 300 metres back to the road and 700 back to the path, so it provides the sufficient space to provide for the extension at either end should the city choose to do that. So there is space. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. And your third question, Councillor Brenda Abrandis?
Thank you again, Director Shaw. Final question, just with regard to the actual proposed capital costs for undertaking this, just an indicative estimate if possible.
Ms Shaw.
Thank you. Approximately $20,000.
Thank you, Director Shaw.
Okay, so we're still debating Councillor Choi's amended motion. Is there anyone who hasn't spoken already who wishes to speak either for or against Councillor Choi's amended motion? I might briefly speak against. I concur with what Councillor Navard has already said. It's intended that the proposed parklet is a trial, and I do think that 6 months is perhaps insufficient to make a meaningful assessment of the success or otherwise of the trial. I think we probably do need a full calendar year to be able to gather meaningful data. So with that, is there anyone who wishes to speak either for or against who hasn't already spoken? No? Councillor Choi, you have 5 minutes to rebut any of the arguments made against, if you would like to do so.
Thank you. Look, councillors, to many in the community, this may seem like an easy path for council. The proposal sounds exciting and perhaps necessary for activating Angelo Street at night, as Councillor Coveney has clearly outlined. But in fact, there has been a lot to consider, as also clearly outlined by neighbouring businesses and residents. Especially as a ward representative, I've received feedback for and against the proposal from a variety of interested stakeholders, as I'm sure you have as well. This is probably due because it was unforeseen, with no policy in place to date for such application. There is also the petition received this evening from over 100 signatories, I believe. So to balance these concerns with the applicant's commercial endeavours and following advice received from Director Shaw today, I submitted my amended motion for Council's consideration should Councillor Coveney's amended motion before us fail. I urge councillors to consider and weigh up all the perspectives, pros and cons for this proposal for all users and stakeholders, and not just a single applicant's own business desires. As I said before, many local governments have successfully undertaken 6-month parklet trials. The parklet fees that I've also seen that some local governments charge per square metre. So this applicant's already had the benefit of the parklet trial for 12 months, and if councillors agree 6 months, fee being waived. So to me, the cost of construction is not really a relevant consideration in reducing it from 12 months to 6 months. If it's successful, then I presume the applicant will be pursuing a renewal. And I'm sure that the council and the city, may recommend such renewal if it's successful and it comes back with no implications on the other neighbouring stakeholders and residents. So yes, I just urge councillors to please consider everything before them and make your decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. So, councillors, I'm about to put Councillor Choi's amended motion to the vote. So we're voting on the changes proposed by Councillor Choi. Depending on how this vote goes, we'll then return to the substantive motion. So with that, please cast your votes on Councillor Choi's amended motion. And Councillor Choi, how do you vote?
Yes.
All right. So the votes in. The Councillor Choi's amended motion has been defeated 2 votes to 7. For the benefit of those who are listening via YouTube, those in favour were Councillor Choi and Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Those against were Councillor Cridland, Councillor Waugh, Councillor D'Souza, Councillor Prendeville, Councillor Navard, Councillor Coveney and myself, Mayor Milner. So, we now return to the substantive motion before us, which is as per Councillor Coveney's motion. We've had Councillor Covey move it and Councillor Waugh second it. Is there anyone who wishes to speak against the substantive motion before us? No? Is there anyone else? Councillor Brenda Abrandis, question? By all means.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question for the administration. The proposed motion put forward by the city indicated not to have an intention for exclusivity. Can the city perhaps comment on that as to why it might have been beneficial to not have a restriction?
Ms. Shaw, can I send that your way?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the applicant included the exclusive use as part of the proposal when the city was considering the content contained within the submissions and the concerns that were raised through that. We considered that it would be a balance to provide public access to the parklet at all times based on those submissions. In terms of the difference with the licence and the conditions being imposed, if this was a lease under the local law, the applicant would have exclusive possession of that land at all times, which would not be appropriate given it's a road reserve. Whereas a licence, you can include conditions in the licence that provides for exclusive use at certain times. So it is open for council to include the conditions on here to provide for exclusive use during the operating times of the restaurant.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw. Councillors, is there Councillor D'Souza speaking or asking a question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a question with regards to clause 1G of Councillor Coveney's motion. The hours obviously tend to vary sort of over the days. My question is basically how will the city enforce these to ensure public access does remain outside of these hours?
Thank you. Michelle?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So we would act in response to any complaints that have been received, but the design of the parklet itself doesn't include any barriers that would otherwise restrict public access in any instance. If the structure of the parklet had changed to rope off access or include material barriers, then we could enforce compliance with the approved application and the design. But it's certainly open to us to ensure that we can go and undertake compliance functions if required, if it was closed off.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the substantive motion before us?
Yes.
Councillor Choi.
Yes, thank you. Generally, I'm okay with the couple of the changes proposed by. Actually, it's just sorry, Mr. Mayor, can I just reiterate? It's just 1G's changed. Is that right? Proposed change with the amendment that we're now considering.
Well, the motion, substantive motion, Councillor Choi, is exactly as it appears in the amended motion submitted by Councillor Coveney. Have you got a copy of that with you?
Yes, I do. Thank you. So I'm just looking at 1G then. I just think it's a bit of a, it's a bit inconsistent for me when I'm looking at this that the applicant does not have exclusive or uninterrupted use of the area at all times, but then followed by the parklet must be made publicly available outside the applicant's business hours. That doesn't sit right with me. And taking into account the residents and having businesses concerns, I just think it adds more. It doesn't sort of alleviate any of those concerns. So I just find that difficult to support.
All right, thank you, Councillor Choi. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in favour of the substantive motion before us? I'll say a few words. So I note that the parklet licence is only for a period of 12 months on a trial basis. The clauses, paragraph 1G makes sense to me. As I read it, it initially starts with a statement. The applicant does not have exclusive or uninterrupted use of the area at all times. Okay, noted. The parklet must be publicly available outside the applicant's business hours of, and then the business hours follow. So to my mind, the parklet is publicly available outside of those business hours. So that makes sense to me. I think the substantive motion before us will give council a good opportunity to see if the parklet licence operates as intended. And hopefully this parklet will help activate Angelo Street. It'll help promote the vibrancy and the nighttime economy that we all want for this very important part of our community. So without labouring the point, I'm in favour of this motion and ask that you support it. So with that, is there anyone else who wishes to speak either for or against the substantive motion who hasn't already spoken? Councillor Prendeville, and perhaps you can let us know if you're speaking for or against.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll be speaking for the proposal. This might sound a little bit repetitive, but I just wanted to reinforce that if we are to give a local business a fair go on a new concept, I think this motion clearly allows that to happen. So I think it's fantastic for Angelo Street. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillors, is there anyone else who wishes to speak for or against? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm speaking for this amended motion. I think it's quite important that we do consider parklets. I would like us to consider them more strategically. We've seen parklets used in some of the other inner city suburbs and they've been used relatively well. They do provide the activation in the area. This is a relatively small parklet. It's fairly quarantined in its location between buildings in a car park opposite a school playground. So I think with regard to the amount of impact it might have, it would be relatively small. And also the hours of use will probably be more beneficial after normal business hours when it's cooler over the summer period as opposed to in the middle of the day. I am still concerned about exclusivity. It would be nice for it to be used by more than just one, but I think the initiative is actually quite good. And the parklet should be used to encourage the respective socialisation and activation of areas in those not so busy hours. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillors, Councillor Navard, yes, you have not spoken either way on this one. You spoke on the amended motion. Yes, and if you could please let us know if you're speaking either for or against.
I'm speaking for Mr. Mayor. I really just wanted to draw attention to some of the aspects to do with safety, and if something had gone wrong, there are mechanisms in place. I've asked about this from the city, and there are opportunities to make adjustments if it proves that there may be some sort of a problem arising. So I just wanted to reassure the community that if something is not quite working properly, it can still be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak for or against the substantive motion who hasn't already spoken?
I have a question.
By all means.
Thank you. So I'm just looking at this amended motion and considering the exclusivity part of it, 1G, and the public bench. So does that mean that public bench then will also not be, can't be used by passerbys during the trading hours of these two businesses?
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, so the bench that wraps around the structure would be included in the licensed area and therefore would not be publicly available during the times that have been specified in the amended motion.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, anyone else wishes to speak either for or against? Councillor Cridland.
I'll be very quick. Most things in life are a bit of a compromise, and we have to make a decision as to what we think is best. But for me, South Perth is gaining a reputation of being a residential suburb, a lovely place with some green trees, but my God, is it boring. And I think perhaps this is one way of just trying something different, something interesting, and perhaps, who knows, we might even find something interesting for the people who live here to enjoy.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Is there anyone else who would like to speak either for or against the substantive motion who hasn't already spoken? That's a no. Councillor Coveney, you are the mover. You now have 5 minutes to rebut any arguments made against, if you would like to do so.
Nothing further, thank you.
All right. So, councillors, I'm now putting the substantive motion to the vote. Please cast your votes. And Councillor Choi, how do you vote?
Yes.
In favour? All right. Then in that case, the substantive motion has been carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We now move on to the next item to be withdrawn this evening for discussion. That is item 10.3.1, entitled Sports Spaces Investigation Feasibility Study, Sir James Mitchell Park, South Perth, Elam Street End. Councillor Cridland, I understand that you have an amended motion. If you would like to do so, I'll give you the opportunity to simply move your amended motion as though it were the substantive motion, originating motion. Would you like to do that?
I would, thank you for that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, if you could please read your amended motion and then I'll see about a seconder.
Sure. My motion, the amended one, is as in the published agenda for this meeting, and the difference is on the first line, I don't know if people in the audience can see it up on the screen, is a change of $25,000 to $50,000. And on the second line is to remove the 50% figure from that line. Those are the two changes that I make to the, I seek to make, of course, to the officer's recommendation if I have a seconder.
All right, thank you, Councillor Cridland. I'm happy to second that. The floor is yours if you'd like to give us your reasons.
Thank you very much.
Bearing in mind that this is the substantive motion, not an amended motion.
Sure. First of all, it won't be the first time tonight that I'll be embarrassed, but I'm embarrassed after hearing the debate on the previous item. I certainly haven't prepared anything that good for this item. I enjoyed the presentation on this matter last week for a number of reasons, but it also raised with me some of my recollections of having dealt with the same item I think about 9-10 years ago. By way of background, I've been involved in junior sport in the city of South Perth for almost 25 years. And in that time, I've driven kids to Joondalup for their home South Perth games. I've driven them to Southern River for their home South Perth games, to the city of Canning, to Belmont, to Vic Park, to their home games. And that is because my kids and other people's kids here in South Perth don't have basketball courts, they don't have netball courts, they don't have enough cricket pitches. They don't have hockey turfs, so they can play at home. So they travel 40 minutes or an hour away to play a home game. Now, this particular area is a much loved area. It's part of our freehold land, but people in South Perth love it. It's used currently for passive recreation, but in the past it was used for active recreation. It's been used as sports fields before. Indeed, as one of the people tonight in the audience raised in a question. So, from my perspective, I think it is important that the city deal with what is an obvious hole in our public amenities. We don't have proper, adequate sporting facilities for our little kids. In fact, I think it's really quite embarrassing. And I can't think of any other local government that has such poor provision of sporting facilities for its kids. Now, very generously last week, there was an indication that Wesley would put $25,000 towards the feasibility study. But then that immediately raises questions in everyone's minds, in the audience, no doubt, that is the city already intending to issue this prime foreshore land to Wesley? Well, from my perspective, and I can only speak for myself, no. The council and the city has made absolutely no decision on who might use this land if it is feasible for it to be used for some active junior sport. And it may be, even if it's feasible, the city decides not to. But I wish to amend the officer recommendation so there could be no doubt in the public's mind that the council or the city had made any decision to allocate this particular location to any user. And all that we are doing at this stage is investigating whether or not it is feasible within all of our resources and within the demands and wishes of the people of South Perth, that this be used as a location for active recreation. I ask that my fellow councillors simply support me in this motion so that this can take the single step forward, which is all we're doing. That's all I'd like to say.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. I'll say a few words as seconder. Councillors, by strategy, I think it's 3.3.3 of the city's strategic community plan, this council committed to improving the amenity value and sustainable uses of our public open spaces and foreshores. There have been conversations about upgrading this portion of Sir James Mitchell Park for the use of shared sport spaces since 2012. I understand, I'm aware that there is some concern about this item from residents living in close proximity to the relevant portion of Sir James Mitchell Park. That's completely understandable, and I do thank those residents for taking the time to contact council with their concerns. That said, our residents have recently given this council a very clear mandate to provide better access to sporting and recreation facilities in this district. I agree with what Councillor Cridland has said. The city is not a greenfield site. We don't have the ability to magic up brand new parks, ovals and reserves to meet the growing demand for sporting spaces from our community. That necessarily means that we must make better use of the public facilities in our district. The motion before us is a measured and relatively modest proposal. It doesn't commit us to any particular use of Sir James Mitchell Park. It merely commits us to $50,000 of expenditure for a feasibility study. But, councillors, that feasibility study is important. It's necessary for us to understand what uses the relevant portion of Sir James Mitchell Park could potentially be put to and how cost effective those potential uses might be. It's a reasonable and a sensible first step that will provide us with the information that we need to make informed and responsible decisions in the future. I do agree with Councillor Cridland that the city should solely fund the costs of the feasibility study. As he's already alluded to, this will ensure that our community has the confidence that the feasibility study will consider all potential options and users. Now, I should say that I'm grateful to Wesley College, as I'm sure we all are, for their generous and good faith offer to share the costs of the feasibility study. But under the circumstances, it's appropriate that we bear the costs of that feasibility study alone. We will look forward to liaising with Wesley College and with other stakeholders and sporting groups following the results of that feasibility study. So, put simply, councillors, I do believe this motion represents good governance, and I ask you all to support it. So that's me. Is there anyone who wishes to speak against the motion? Councillor Choi? The question? Fire away.
Firstly, just in relation to a question that was asked earlier, can the city please confirm that Sir James Mitchell Park specifically was not included in the city's presentation as an option for sports spaces investigation at the council workshop in July this year?
Ms. Shaw?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, so as part of that presentation, we outlined the demand for sports spaces, but we didn't specify any particular reserve, and that includes Elm Street.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the motion? Councillor Choi, another question or speaking?
Yeah, sorry, I had two questions.
Fire away.
One if that's okay. Can the city please confirm if Sir James Mitchell Park was raised as an option for a sports space investigation in the city's presentation to newly elected members as part of their induction series in October and November this year, please?
Ms. Shaw?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, so it was the same as the presentation that was provided back in July. The commentary at the presentation was simply that the city has a need for sports spaces and we have growing demand for sports spaces.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw. Any further questions, Councillor Choi?
No, thank you.
All right. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the motion? Councillor Choi?
Yeah, sorry, I would like to speak to it if I can.
Speaking for or against?
Well, look, I'm going to foreshadow a deferral of this item pending this motion failing, but I do appreciate...
Sorry, Councillor Choi, I'll back up a couple of steps there. You're proposing a deferral if the motion fails. Could you explain that? I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, before I saw Councillor Cridland's email come through, which I only received when it was sent to me just prior to the meeting, I was thinking about foreshadowing a deferral of this item until such time as the city has consolidated its needs analysis of sporting requirements and available sporting reserves across the whole district and completed its public open space strategy sometime next year. So that's what I was thinking.
But I'm confused, Councillor Choi. If the motion fails, why is a deferral necessary?
Sorry, Mr Mayor, I didn't receive Councillor Cridland's motion until just prior to this meeting.
It's
So
been on the hub
about
for at least a couple of days, Councillor Choi.
Sorry?
It's been published on the hub for all councillors for at least a couple of days.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't see it until just before the meeting. So, I mean, this item is unfortunately not without some public consternation or controversy, as everyone's aware, with elected members being contacted.
Sorry, Councillor Choi, are you speaking against the item? Are you preparing a default?
I haven't decided yet.
Well, you've got to indicate whether you're Councillor Choi, please, I'm speaking. You can speak for, you can speak against, you can move an amended motion, you can move a deferral, but I need to know what it is that you're proposing.
Okay, I'll just wait for a minute then. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak either for or against the motion who hasn't already spoken? Councillor Coveney.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I wish to speak for the motion. There appears to be three principal objections to the playing fields that I hear about. Firstly, the lack of consultation, that the ground is unsuitable, and the perception that the city is wedded to Wesley and that therefore hinders the community use. In relation to the lack of consultation and the unsuitability of the ground, that's of course the purpose of the feasibility study. The ground will be tested, the community will be consulted, and local sporting clubs will be consulted in that process. All that happens so that we as a city can actually make an informed decision about whether or not to ultimately proceed. In relation to the perception of being wed to Wesley, the study is being conducted by the city itself, and of course there's nothing that formally weds us to them. I have full faith in the city administration that they will act with an independent mind, and I have that same view of councillors. Personally, I welcome the contribution of Wesley of $25,000 because it saves the ratepayer $25,000. But nevertheless, if the city is to fund the study itself, that's going to mitigate the public concern of impartiality. And so on balance, I do support that self-funded study. Playing fields, of course, have the potential to offer significant social and economic benefits to our community. As already noted, the city needs more space for sporting fields. This is an available space, possibly. And the alternative idea of needing to buy space to clear and then put playing fields on them would come at a considerable cost to the taxpayer, which I wouldn't support. So to me, this is a no-brainer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak either? Councillor Navard, and perhaps you can let us know if you're speaking for or against.
I'm speaking for, Mr Mayor, and there are just two aspects. I strongly endorse the idea of the city covering the entire cost of the feasibility, simply to ensure the community that it's a hands-off approach and it will be carefully considered for that reason. That's pretty much all I have to say on that. I just think it's good.
Thank you very much. Councillors, Councillor Prendeville.
Thank you, Mr
If you can
Mayor.
let us know if you're speaking for or against.
I was speaking for the amended motion. I know in my experience, I've had a lot of feedback from residents in regards to the lack of sporting spaces covering multiple sports. I did have a question earlier for the city, which has been answered through this amended motion. I had concerns that maybe we could support our local public schools with such facilities, and would we offer the spaces and times to them, such as Como Secondary College, because it is an issue on the table at the moment for them. And I think this covers that. It maintains the city's independence and doesn't connect us to anyone in particular. So I'm very much in favour.
Thank you, Councillor Prendeville. Councillor D'Souza.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll speak in favour. I think Councillor Cridland's made a compelling point. I very rarely support motions which seek funding over and above what the city has advised. In this case, I think it's important to have, I think as Councillor Navar described, the arm's length, the independence of this process. It is city freehold land, and as such, the owners should fall on us as the city to fund these investigations. It puts all the work done, all the work to be done beyond reproach, and gives us, I guess, clear air to move forward with doing the investigation.
Thank you, Councillor D'Souza. Councillors, is there anyone else who would like to speak either for or against the substantive motion who hasn't already spoken? Councillor Choi? All right, he's speaking for or against. Councillor Choi?
Okay, well, looks like I'll be speaking for it since any deferral I would have raised probably wasn't going to pass anyway, now that I've heard my fellow elected members speak. So, as I was saying before, this item is unfortunately not without some public consternation or controversy, with elected members being contacted by numerous residents over the past week expressing a number of concerns and queries over the item. And this is in addition to the deputations made against the item at Council last week. I believe this amended motion, though, does go some way to at least alleviate some of the perceived impartiality in relation to the proposed study. I would have preferred the city taking a more global rather than a piecemeal approach in its investigations. And that's why I was thinking about moving a deferral. But as I said before, I will now support Councillor Cridland's amendment. I also note that the city is yet to complete its public open space strategy, so I hope that is maybe I can ask a question on that, see when that is maybe due to be completed. And I think I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Councillors, is there anyone else who wishes to speak either for or against? Councillor Brenda Abrandis? And perhaps let us know if you're speaking for or against.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question of the administration.
Fire away.
Thank you. Just with regard to the in-principle support and financial contribution, so it's been indicated $1.5 million. Has there been any estimated costs with regard to the capital construction that might give us an indication as to how the 1.5 million had been derived?
Ms. Shaw?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No, we would need the results of the feasibility study to determine what the actual cost of development for sports spaces is. The 1.5 million is an arbitrary figure that was provided by Wesley.
Thank you, Ms. Shaw. Another question, Councillor Brenda Brandis?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd actually like to speak for the item. Thank you.
By all means.
Thanks. So, look, this feasibility study being undertaken is quite important. As earlier noted, it's part of our strategic community plan to actually ensure that we have enough sport playing facilities. It's been on the agenda for a while. It's something that we do need to revisit and consider. So this is a feasibility study to consider the use of the land. Very important that we have that we incur the cost directly ourselves for the reasons that have been said. You know, perception or reality. We don't want it to appear or actually be a situation where there might be, you know, one club, one association, one school having an advantage over others. This report for us tonight does indicate that Wesley College have indicated the hours of exclusivity, again, use over the field should this eventuate. And it does cause concern and alarm for other clubs and associations that would also want to benefit from perhaps these facilities or other facilities. The concern as well is the hours that have actually been presented to us for part of this discussion are primarily impacting juniors sport recreation as well. So it is really important that we undertake this cost on our own behalf. We make our own determination, that we are accountable for the decisions we make without any perception or otherwise due influence. Thank you. I support this.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Brandis. Councillors, is there anyone else who would like to speak either for or against who hasn't already spoken? No. Councillor Cridland? Yes, Councillor Choi, you can ask a question.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Mayor. Just as when I finished off what I was saying before, I did end up with a question for administration. Is just the timeframe for the public open space strategy to be completed, please, in light of the changes to the state planning framework.
Ms Shaw, can I send that your way?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, so the changes to the state planning framework related to public open space contributions that could otherwise be applied on strata applications. So that's already been revoked by the West Australian Planning Commission. We're intending to have the draft public open space strategy prepared by July 2024 and hoping to have that presented for Council's consideration in the second half of next year.
All right, thank you, Ms Shaw. So, councillors, does anyone else have any other questions, or does anyone else wish to speak? No. Councillor Cridland, I'm not sure anyone actually spoke against, but if you wanted to make any points in rebuttal, now's your chance.
In fact, that's what I was going to say. There's nothing to rebut.
Thank you very much. All right, councillors, I'm about to put this to the substantive item, which is as per Councillor Cridland's amended motion. We're putting that to the vote now. Please cast your votes. And how do you vote, Councillor Choi?
Yes.
All right, that was unanimous. Thank you, councillors. All right, we now move on to the next item to be withdrawn this evening for discussion, which is item 10.3.3, entitled Proposed Use Not Listed, Short-Term Accommodation, Lot 1, Unit 1/31 Banksia Terrace, Kensington. Councillor Waugh, I understand that you've got an alternative motion that you would like to move. If you would like to do so, I'll give you the opportunity to move the alternative motion straight off the bat.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Would you like to read your alternative motion?
Yes, thank you. That pursuant to the provisions of the City of South Perth Town Planning Scheme No. 6 and the Metropolitan Region Scheme, the application for development approval for use not listed short-term accommodation on Lot 1, Unit 1/31 Banksia Terrace, Kensington, be refused for the following reasons. Number 1, the proposed short-term rental accommodation is situated adjacent low-medium density residential dwellings and will adversely impact the residential amenity of adjacent owners and occupiers associated with noise disturbance from guest activity and is not consistent with the objects of the zone. Number 2, the proposed short-term rental accommodation is an introduction of a commercial land use in an area that is surrounded by premises used for permanent residential purposes. Number 3, the proposed use does not identify how car parking and safe ingress and egress from the premises will be dealt with. Number 4, the management plan is not able to ensure the behaviours of guests and visitors will not have an ongoing impact on the amenity of the existing residents given the context of the subject site that will have a consequential impact on residential use by surrounding residents. And number 5, the application is inconsistent with the requirements of orderly and proper planning.
Thank you very much. Is there someone who would like to second Councillor Waugh's alternative motion? Councillor Coveney, thank you. Councillor Waugh, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just before I start, I'd like to just foreshadow that in the event that this alternate motion is not carried, I do intend to move an amended motion as circulated earlier today. In respect to this property, the property is a small strata unit surrounded by small strata units. It is opposite an apartment complex. It is accessed by a very narrow laneway that also services other properties behind it. It has one undercover parking bay with an additional area where their bins are stored, and it, as Sims is also proposed to be used for an additional car bay. Both of these confined spaces are not easily accessible. Banksia Terrace has limited parking with only one side of the street available for parking. The other side is cycleway. It is not appropriate to consider that it could provide overflow parking to the proposed development. When I door knocked in the area, the neighbours, it became very clear to me that the neighbours all knew each other, and it was clear to me that the residential community in that vicinity is very much intact. In respect to the planning framework, clause 3.35 of the City's Town Planning Scheme 6 requires the local government to have regard to the scheme objectives listed in clause 1.6. In this regard, the proposed use in this development is inconsistent with objects of the City's TPS 6, in particular, clause 1.6A, D, E, F and G. The proposed use in this development is also inconsistent with the City's own policy, P350.18, short-term accommodation, and in particular, clauses 2.0, A and C. In addition, the proposed use in this development is inconsistent with the objectives of the residential zone contained within the new LPS 7 that is presently before the Minister. And further, the proposed use in this development is inconsistent with the WAPC position statement released last month, in particular clause 5.2.2.2 relating to the location of short-term rental accommodation being primarily for the purpose of tourist destinations. In respect to the amenity, to use the reasons for decision out of a recent SAP case of Lawrence in the City of Rockingham, which was decided in May last year, if the proposed development is approved, then notwithstanding the measured management measures, guests at the holiday house will have an expectation that they are entitled to use the subject site in the ordinary way that one would use holiday accommodation. This expectation on the part of guests includes the opportunity for visitors at the subject site. Given the physical layout of the subject site and its close relationship to the adjoining residential sites, the narrow and limited access ways, no attempt to manage or control visitors, and the proposed development is likely to lead to a conflict with adjoining neighbours in terms of noise, parking and possible antisocial behaviour. Second, the close relationship between the subject property and its adjoining residents means it is more likely for disturbance of the amenity in the neighbourhood enjoyment of their property. Given the close proximity of the proposed development to the adjoining permanent residents, which have outdoor areas and bedrooms in close proximity to the common boundary of the subject site, the management plan does not guarantee protection of the amenity for adjoining residents. Third, the proposed development is not compatible with the surrounding land use as the immediate context of the subject site is residential, with two-storey grouped dwelling developments located in close proximity to both boundaries of the subject site and across the road. Fourth, the tribunal's findings in the case I've got several cases listed, but I won't go into them, general principles of behaviour of guests and visitors in the codes of conduct, and even considering other measures in management plan, including a restriction in the number of guests and noise monitoring devices to be installed, is insufficient to ensure that this proposed development will be compatible within its context. Fifth, the immediate surrounding context, which is essentially residual and intact and consists of group dwellings, gives rise to interface issues with the permanent residents of these dwellings. Sixth, the proposed development does not maintain or enhance the quality of the existing residential area, which is an important objective for the residential zone, and therefore it does not satisfy the objectives of the residential zone in either TPS 6 or LPS 7. Item 10.3.3 did not result in submissions from the community. As a community representative, I then went to the area and I spoke to the surrounding residents, and the issues that they raised related to parking, amenity, the management plan, the property being a strata and in very close proximity to neighbours, and a concern regarding a general proliferation of Airbnb-type properties approved within the area. So in conclusion, the Responsible Officer's report sets out the planning framework. It identifies that proposed development does not comply with policy 350.18. However, it does suggest that the proposed development is consistent with the WAPC's position statement, but it does not identify how. The development is not located near to or within close proximity to any tourism development or opportunity within the City of South Perth and is not considered a tourism area. Rather, it is located near to a primary school. There are no cafes, shops, tourism facilities or other tourist-related amenities. The residential
Councillor Waugh, I have to interrupt there because that is 5 minutes, but I will move a motion that you be granted a further 5 minutes. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor D'Souza, thank you. Councillors, please cast your votes on a motion that Councillor Waugh be granted a further 5 minutes to speak. And Councillor Choi, how do you vote on that?
Yes.
All right. I think we're waiting on one more vote. Evidence, who are we waiting on? Oh, it's come in. Brilliant. Okay, that was unanimous. Sorry for the interruption, Councillor Waugh. Please do continue.
Thank you. The residential character of this area is highly intact, and approval of this development is inconsistent with the planning framework and only serves to contribute to our city becoming a dormitory suburb for Perth. For the reasons that I've set out, I'm putting an alternate motion forward, refusing the use not listed short-term accommodation as proposed. I'm also assured that the City is progressing a review of its local planning policies, and in light of the proposed amendments to the regulations for short-stay accommodation, that the new policy will be presented to Council at the next meeting in February 2024. This review is likely to introduce more robust requirements with respect to the short-stay accommodation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Councillor Coveney, you're the seconder. Would you like to speak to this item?
Yes, please. Thank you, Mr Mayor. The alternative motion by Councillor Waugh appears to be reflective of the views of the locality as evidenced by her own polling data. I commend her for engaging with the community. That exercise is invaluable. I too share her concern that short-term accommodation scattered in residential zones undermines the legitimate commercial short stay providers and also negatively impacts the residential zone. I too note draft Local Planning Scheme 7, which prohibits short-term accommodation such as Airbnbs from operating in areas other than in certain precincts, and this area is not one of those precincts. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the alternative motion?
I have a couple of questions.
Fire away, Councillor Choi.
Thank you. So I just wanted to know, I understand Councillor Waugh's motion included, I think, 3 inconsistencies. I'm just wondering if the relevant officers could address each of those and provide some sort of a statement on each of those and whether they agree or not, please, in the first instance.
Councillor Choi, might be, perhaps if you could specify the first of the inconsistencies that you referred to, and we'll go through them one by one. What's the first inconsistency that you'd like the administration to speak to?
Sure, thank you. So reason 1 inconsistency was local planning policy 3.50.18.
Ms Shaw, can I send that one your way?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, contained within the report on the matter, there's a table that compares the application to the provisions contained within the local planning policy, and it's outlined throughout that table where the city has considered the application does not comply with the criteria contained in the policy. However, for the reasons outlined in the report, the officers are of the opinion that where there is non-compliance, it's either suitable given the location that the proposal is within, or that the matter can be overcome by conditions ensuring compliance with the management plan.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. And the second inconsistency you're asking about, Councillor Choi?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So sorry, just in relation to that first inconsistency, so is the city proposing that there'll be some sort of something in the management order that will overcome that inconsistency that Councillor Waugh has raised?
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So, for example, on page 30 of the agenda, one of the requirements of the existing local planning policy is that they should be located in close proximity to development of the site with tourist features. The city's assessment on that is that it does not comply because it's not within 400 metres of a tourism significance or activity centre. However, you can see there that we've provided that it is within 900 metres of Sir James Mitchell Park, which could be considered of tourism significance. So as with all local planning policies, they are discretionary, and it is open for council to consider variations to local planning policy.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. And your next question, Councillor Choi?
Thank you through the Chair to Director Shaw. Just in relation to the inconsistency with the WAPC policy statement, I think you've already addressed that now, Director Shaw, sorry, with what you just said. That's fine. I'll move on to the third one in relation to objects of the zoning in TPS 6 and due regard to LPS 7.
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just going back to the WAPC position statement, the city is of the opinion that the application is consistent with the WAPC position statement on the basis that's outlined in the report, but also given the criteria that's contained within that local planning policy. And I might just take that opportunity to make some reference to some of the changes that have also been released by the state government around short-term accommodation. So the state government has effectively said that they're looking at establishing a registration scheme for short stay accommodation. And what that means is an application for development approval would need to be approved before the business could list themselves on the relevant short stay platforms. So that's the first change. But the second and probably more important change is that there's a proposal to introduce model land uses within the regulations for either hosted or unhosted short-term accommodation. The city is awaiting the outcome of those amendments to the planning regulations, but we're anticipating that they would be introduced as what's known as deemed provisions. And so what that means is that it would be applicable to all local planning schemes that the use could be considered. Going back to the comments with the objectives of the zone and the regard to local planning scheme number 7 in general. So the reason that the use needs to be considered as a use not listed is because there's no land use contained within current TPS 6 for short-term accommodation. So it becomes a use not listed and automatically becomes an application that is accepted and then advertised. Under draft local planning scheme number 7, there were also no model land uses contained with respect to short-term accommodation. And the reason for that is because the WAPC's position statement and the prior draft position statement, which introduced different land uses for short-term related holiday accommodation, hadn't been released at the time that draft local planning scheme 7 was drafted. So both TPS 6 and draft LPS 7 don't include land uses related to short-term accommodation. That would be rectified when the regulations are amended, but under both cases, they would be treated as a use not listed.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Did you have any further questions, Councillor Choi?
Yes, thank you. Through the Chair, Director Shaw, that's really useful information you provided. The next question I had was in relation to amenity. Are you of the view, or is the City of the view that, that this proposed development could negatively impact on the residential character and undermine the local amenity?
Ms Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So when we consider amenity, there are a range of factors. Amenity is actually defined in our regulations, but what we would typically do is go out on site and have a look at the existing prevailing streetscape to determine what the character of the area is. So from the city's opinion, the area is low to mid residential development predominantly. There's available on-street parking. It's within about 50 metres of Canning Highway, within 70 metres of other commercial land uses. And so the city formed the view that there was a mix of different land uses throughout the area. The second consideration for amenity is through the statutory advertising that's undertaken on the application. And so typically, if the city received a number of submissions raising concerns with the amenity or the potential for the amenity to be compromised as a result of approving the application, we would have weight to the content of those submissions in considering the application. So given no submissions were received during the statutory advertising, we've taken that to be that the adjacent residents had no objection to the proposal. The last thing that we would otherwise consider is where there would be potential amenity impacts, so to do with, for example, noise or car parking issues, whether or not those issues could be reasonably overcome by enforcement of a management plan. And so the city reviewed the content of the management plan and was satisfied that those matters could be reasonably addressed.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Any further questions, Councillor Choi?
Just one more, and again, thank you through the Chair to Director Shaw. So that's also interesting to hear that there was no objections during the public consultation period to this recommendation, to this proposal or application. So my last question is just in regards to implications of going against the officer recommendation on this application and the likely outcome, if you're able to say, please.
Sorry, Councillor Choi, I might have misheard you there. Were you asking about what the consequences of going ahead with the officer recommendation or the substantive motion before us would be?
No, the likely implication of going against the officer recommendation with this motion in front of us and the likely outcome of any, I guess, the application elsewhere if for whatever reason council wanted to support this motion and sort of again it would be going against the officer's recommendation. So just want to understand the implications of that, please.
Ms Shaw?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So as with all development applications, it would be open for the applicant to make an application to the State Administrative Tribunal to review the decision. It would be inappropriate for me to comment on what the potential outcome of SAP would be, but what I can do is maybe provide some comment on the two arguably most recent SAT cases in relation to that. The first being Kogan and City of Vincent. SAT upheld the decision from the City of Vincent to refuse that application on the grounds of amenity. However, in that context, the tribunal found that one car parking bay provided for the short-term accommodation was sufficient to accommodate the use, and that wasn't the reason for refusal. Rather, it was the introduction of a commercial land use in otherwise what was a predominantly residential and heritage, an area that was characterised by heritage. So that was that case. The second most recent one was Lawrence v City of Rockingham. City of Rockingham actually approved the application for short stay accommodation in the first instance for up to 12 people. One of the conditions on that development application required an updated management plan to address potential concerns of amenity. During the 12-month trial period for the application, the applicant didn't comply with the conditions to provide the updated management plan, and there were objections received from adjacent landowners that the short-term accommodation was causing noise, disturbance and parking issues. As a result of that, when they sought to have the extension or the review of that application extended beyond the life of the original 12 months approval, the applicant instead lodged an application for a holiday home, and that was what was subsequently then refused by the City of Rockingham. When SAT considered that refusal, when that was reviewed, SAT formed the review that given there hadn't been a demonstrated management of the short stay accommodation for the preceding 12 months, given it wasn't demonstrated that they could address the amenity impacts, the decision to refuse the holiday house was upheld. So hopefully that gives a bit of context.
Thank you, Ms Shaw. Councillors, is there anyone who would like to speak against the alternative motion before us? No. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak in favour of the alternative motion before us? Councillor Cridland.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, but I might speak against it, if that's all right.
Please proceed.
We have a national housing crisis where people can't get appropriate rentals. We have people sleeping in cars at some of our local parks. Terrible to see. We have people who are renting out their houses as Airbnbs, and it provides an income for them, and lots of people use those facilities. They're not long-term tenants, their kids don't go to the school, they're not part of the community in the same way as the rest of the street. So yes, our community loses a little bit each time a long-term rental is changed into an Airbnb, in particular where it's not in an obvious tourism area, like near the zoo, for example, or down near Menn Street. And sometimes people who use these Airbnbs behave badly, and which annoys neighbours in otherwise residential areas. So you're thinking, what is this person talking about who's just said why it's not a terribly good idea to have an Airbnb in this location? Well, I just think we need to be consistent with our decision making, and I think we probably need some more help from the state government if we are to have a decent basis for moving away from the way we've dealt with Airbnb or short-term accommodation in this otherwise residential city. You know, that place I called boring, I think, a couple of items ago. Because I think if we don't act consistently, then we've got a trouble. We will cause trouble with people who are applicants and come before us. I think in previous Airbnb use applications in similar sort of locations, from my recollection, we've said to people, you need to have a 12-month trial effectively, and then come back, and then either it's all over because you need to apply for it to continue, and we'll have the stats on whether or not it's been managed properly and whether there are neighbourhood complaints, or whether there are none. And I just From a personal perspective, as someone who, for all the reasons I said, thinks a transfer of rental properties to Airbnb is a very poor outcome for our community. Even though I want to, for that reason, the other reasons about consistency, I just can't support this alternative motion, although I commend its preparation and the amount of work that went into that preparation.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Councillors, is there anyone else who wishes to speak either for or against the alternative motion before us at the moment? Councillor Navard?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd actually like to speak for the motion, particularly because I am familiar with the area, and I do think that particular location, first of all, I think there is a significant psychological barrier as well as some tight corners there that it would be worth mentioning. The psychological barrier is the one that refers to Canning Highway and the 400-metre walking distance down to what would be deemed a tourist site. And so I do think that does create a barrier that gives us some legitimacy for challenging the location of an Airbnb in that location in Kensington. There are a couple of other things that worry me about it as well. One is the tightness of the parking issues. Another one is the fact that I do know that vehicles do rat runs from George Street. They turn left and then they drive like crazy up through so that they can either come out on Banksia or Hovea Terrace. And given that there's a school nearby, that disturbs me because the vision there is not wonderful, and the particular location of the property is also quite tightly wedged into the top end of the street. For those particular reasons, I am concerned about it turning into an Airbnb, particularly if there's a proposal that should be 6 people and there's not really sufficient parking on the premises. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Navard. Just to clarify, were you arguing that the proposal be approved or refused?
I was speaking in favour.
Okay, so you're in favour of the application being approved? Oh, no. You're in favour of the alternative motion? Okay, good. Just wanted to make sure. Thanks. All right, councillors, is there anyone? Councillor Prendeville.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to make a couple of comments in favour of the alternative motion. I understand our need for consistency, but I think what we have here is a real opportunity. Like Councillor Navard mentioned, the parking, I know the area quite well, and the parking and getting in and out of that space is very tricky. I think we have an opportunity to protect the Banksia Terrace residents and their families. I understand that no one sent feedback in, but clearly Councillor Waugh's time on foot in the street returned information back to us, which is vital in a sense that this is a very quiet, close-knit community, and I think that this will have a negative impact on the residents and also the general feeling and vibe of the street in itself. I think that the increase of traffic to and fro, the different types of people, different times of day, the noise issues and all those kinds of things really make me feel quite strongly towards this alternative motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Prendeville. Councillors, is there anyone else who hasn't spoken either for or against the alternative motion? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be speaking against this alternative motion. Firstly, the location is a proximity to tourist features. Whilst not 400 metres, it is still close enough. The proposal that we have before us tonight is not unreasonable and is relatively much in keeping with the adjacent areas. This is low to medium density. The need for short-term accommodation is quite critical. Being a relatively inner-city type city, we need to actually try to accommodate short-term stay, which is seen as a greater need. The impact on parking has been raised as one issue. I see this as less of a concern. I think it would be highly unlikely that you'd have 6 vehicles simultaneously being used at that premises. The impact on parking has not been considered when we take into account other parts of the city that actually are very heavily impacted with the infill and the subdivisions. Gardner Street's a classic example where you need to negotiate every second car down that street during peak time and off-peak time. The non-compliance that's been addressed tonight has been noted as being discretionary and being reasonable. So on the basis that the officer's recommendation have actually countered the arguments with regard to the non-compliance, I'm quite comfortable that we should not be supporting this alternative motion. The impact of the potential LPS 7 and the increased density along that corridor is going to have a much more significant impact. So with regard to short-term accommodation stay, I find this quite appropriate, and I think we should be not supporting the alternative motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Councillors, is there anyone who hasn't spoken either for or against who would like to speak to this alternative motion?
Yes.
Councillor Choi, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Look, I'd like to speak against this alternative motion as well for the reasons already provided by the other elected members, but mainly because of what Director Shaw has also explained further, in addition to what's been outlined in the report. A lot of areas have parking issues. We've heard from residents tonight about all sorts of issues that they've got with some of the items that passed through council tonight. I'm satisfied that we should be pulling off the recommendation on this item, as we've done with previously, I believe, similar items like this that have come before council before. And yeah, I'm comfortable with what's like I said, has been outlined by everyone else here this evening, and so I'd be supporting off the recommendation over this alternative motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Choi. Councillors, is there anyone who hasn't spoken already who would like to speak? I might put in my 2 cents for what they're worth, and we have had some very good arguments on both sides tonight, so I'd like to commend everyone who's participated in this debate. I'd particularly like to commend Councillor Waugh for what looked like some very well researched, and clearly a lot of effort has gone into constructing that alternative motion, so thank you for that. I am speaking against the alternative motion. Once again, I think there's been very good arguments on both sides, but I am very conscious that if an applicant puts in a development application to this council and it complies with the town planning scheme and the associated legislation and regulations, then we are obliged to pass that development application, notwithstanding that we might not think it's ideal, we might think there's ways that it could have been done better. It's been hard to decide. There have been good arguments on both sides, but on balance, I think I'm persuaded by what Ms Shaw has had to say. I could be wrong, but I have to make a decision, and for me, I think it's more likely that this one ought to be approved. So with that, is there anyone else who would like to speak who hasn't spoken already? No. In that case, Councillor Waugh, you have 5 minutes to rebut any arguments against, if you would like to do so.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't remember who said it, but yes, it was you, Mr. Cridland. So that we are in a national housing crisis at the moment. In fact, that was one of the concerns that one of the residents in the locality said. They had 2 adult children presently living with them because there was no rental accommodation available in the vicinity, and they expressed their concern about that property being removed. Secondly, 900 metres is not a walkable catchment, and also when you take into consideration Canning Highway, I understand Councillor Brenda Brandis also suggested that it was close enough. I do question the reason as to why we have policies when they're not applied. Why would we put 450 metres in there when 900 metres is close enough? In terms of the town planning scheme, where a use is not listed, it ordinarily means it is not contemplated. So we would need to ensure that that is amended fairly certainly. In respect to the modelled land uses, hosted and unhosted, I do acknowledge and I'm aware of that. However, they are still required to be in the appropriate areas and they need to comply with both the scheme and whatever the policies are that need to have due regard to. I must say that I am not opposed to short-term accommodation. I am opposed to short-term accommodation in the wrong areas. I think that they are absolutely appropriate in the right areas, and I also believe that frameworks are there for a reason. And just to finish off, I would like to say that consistency in complacency is not the answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Waugh. Councillors, we're putting the alternative motion to the vote now, and Councillor Waugh has foreshadowed that she has an amended motion should the alternative motion failed. So with that, please cast your votes. And Councillor Choi, how do you vote?
No.
All right. So Councillor Waugh's alternative motion has been carried 5 votes to 4. For the benefit of those who are listening via YouTube, those in favour were Councillor Waugh, Councillor Coveney, Councillor D'Souza, Councillor Navard and Councillor Prendeville. Those against were Councillor Brenda Brandis, Councillor Cridland, Councillor Choi and myself, Mayor Milner. So we will now move on to the next item to be withdrawn. Oh, actually, I am conscious. I've been reminded that we've been at this for 2.5 hours now. So I'm going to, I'm going to put in for a 5-minute adjournment. Oh, let's make it 10 minutes. Let's enjoy ourselves. I'll see you all back here at 8:40 p.m. Governance, are we back recording? All right, great. So, welcome back everyone. We now turn to item 10.4.1, which is the listing of payments for November 2023. We have an officer recommendation before us. This is a new report, so we need to consider this item, but I haven't received any alternative or amended motions. Does anyone wish to move the officer recommendation? I guess I will. Is there anyone who wishes a second? Councillor Brenda Abrandis, thank you. I have nothing to say. The listing of payment reports looks fine to me. Well, I'll get to, I'll let Councillor Brenda Abrandis second. Councillor Brenda Abrandis, anything to say?
Nothing to say, Mr Mayor.
All right. Councillors, does anyone oppose this item? Councillor Choi?
I'm fine, thanks.
All right. Then I'll simply use my powers under the standing orders to declare item 10.4.1 carried unanimously. That brings us to item 10.4.2, which is the monthly financial statements for November 2023. Once again, this is a new report, so that's why it's come to us for decision, but we have an officer recommendation before us. I haven't received any alternative or amended motions. Does anyone wish to move the officer recommendation? Councillor Brenda Abrandis, thank you. Anyone to second? Councillor D'Souza, thank you. Councillor Brenda Abrandis, well, I suppose I'll ask beforehand. Does anyone oppose this item? Councillor Choi?
I'm fine, thanks.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded and no one has opposed, so I'll use my powers under the standing orders to declare item 10.4.2 carried unanimously. That brings us to item 10.4.3, which is the City of South Perth Annual Report 2022-2023. An absolute majority is required to carry this item, but I haven't received any amended motions or alternative motions. Does anyone wish to move the officer recommendation? Councillor Brenda Abrandis, thank you. Anyone to second? Councillor Navard, thank you. Does anyone oppose this item? Councillor Choi?
I'm fine, thanks.
Okay, well, no one has opposed the item, so once again, using my powers under the standing orders to declare that carried unanimously, which satisfies the requirement for an absolute majority. That brings us to item 10.4.4, entitled Tender 8 of 2023, Golf Course Management Services for Collier Park Golf Course. I haven't received any amended or alternative motions. We do have an officer recommendation. Does anyone wish to move the officer recommendation? Councillor Coveney, thank you. Anyone to second? Councillor Prendeville, thank you. Councillor Coveney, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm in favour of this motion for several reasons. First, Club Links is an experienced operator. Second, Club Links is the existing operator. Third, Club Links has indicated they'll make a significant capital contribution. And fourth, Club Links will engage in a profit share arrangement with the city. In relation to my first point, experience, according to their website, Club Links operates golf courses and recreational facilities across Australia. In Victoria, it operates Northcote Public Golf Course, the Bondura Public Golf Course, Settlers Run Golf and Country Club, Murder Links Golf Club, Centenary Park Golf Club, the Narrandjeri Stadium, and the Darebin Community Sports Stadium. In New South Wales, it operates the Bingara Gorge Golf Course, the Centennial Parkland Sports Centre, the Fitness and Aquatic Centre at the University of New South Wales, the Wellness Gym Facility at the Reserve Bank of Australia, and the Toll House Wellness Facility at Moore Park. In Queensland, it operates the Menippi Golf Course, and in Western Australia, it of course operates Collier Park Golf Course, in addition to 2J Recreational Centre and the Kennedy Bay Golf Course and Clubhouse. The city is not an expert in the operation of golf course facilities. We are clearly dealing with an organisation who is. Their experience tells us that they know what works, that they know what the punter wants, and they know how to deliver it, and they know how to make a profit. What better credentialed business partner could the city ask for? In relation to my second point, Club Links is the existing operator. From all reports, the city has a good relationship with Club Links. It's not always the case when you enter into a business relationship, or any relationship for that matter, that you have an opportunity to try before you buy. We're fortunate in this case that we do. And why that's important is because of the length of the lease which is being proposed. The city can take comfort that Club Links is the right operator for the job. In relation to my third point, capital contribution, the city has done and will continue to do a wonderful job of maintaining the 27-hole golf course. However, from all reports, the driving range and club facilities are out of date and well behind the standard of other competing golf courses. An overwhelming number of residents are telling me that they are going to golf courses outside of the city because their driving range is better, because they have a nicer function space, and because their playgrounds are more kid-friendly. This is a lost opportunity for both revenue and residents. Club Links' proposal includes concept plans for the redevelopment of existing facilities, including a 2-storey driving range area, retail area, food and beverage facilities, function centre, office area and playground, none of which requires any changes to the layout of the 27-hole golf course. We cannot expect any business to be willing to make such a significant capital contribution without offering them a long-term lease. Without a long-term lease, there is no security on investment. If the city were by ourselves to undertake the capital works being proposed, which at one point or the other will be required, that would be a significant pressure on the rates of residents that I do not support. The capital contribution by Club Links not only eases the financial pressure on residents, but delivers them with improved facilities to enjoy, a win-win. In relation to my fourth point, profit share, the city currently enjoys a profit share arrangement with Club Links. This new proposal will see them to continue to enjoy a profit share arrangement. With little commercial property, the city heavily relies on residents' rates for revenue. Arrangements such as these with Club Links diversifies the city's revenue source and ultimately puts downward pressure on our rates. In conclusion, put frankly, this is a no-brainer. It's strategically sensible, it's financially sensible, and it's socially sensible. Lastly, I wish to commend the city administration. There's clearly been a mountain of work that's gone on behind the scenes here, and the community can be confident that the councillors were all delivered with a very comprehensive workshop, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Coveney. Councillor Prendeville, you're the seconder. Would you like to speak to this item?
I think Councillor Coveney has done a fantastic job in covering all the points. I think Collier Park Golf Club have a really exciting future ahead if this goes through.
Thank you, Councillor Prendeville. Now, I am conscious that this item's been withdrawn for discussion this evening. Councillor Brenda Abrandis, would you like to speak, or are you asking a question?
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions, Mr. Mayor.
By all means.
Okay, just the first question is with regard to the stated net revenue of approximately $800,000 on page 45, so it's $800,000 for the 22-23 year. Having a review of the management accounts for June 23, obviously provide that level of detail. So it indicated the golf course had revenue of, I think it was $5.2 million and expenditure of $3.5 million, with a net profit of $1.7 million. Just wondering, between the management accounts and the annual financial reports, were there any adjustments? Because that was showing $1.7 million in the July pack, and this indicates $800,000.
Thank you, Councillor Brenda Abrandis. Mr Lecoq, can I send that your way?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The difference, there was minimal year-end adjustments. The difference, though, is the allocation of city overheads. That is not inconsistent with the way we adopted the budget as well. However, the city overheads is obviously a necessary allocated cost.
Thank you, Mr Lecoq. A further question, Councillor Brenda Abrandis?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr Lecoq. So the $1.7 million operating net profit in the July reports have reduced down to $800,000 now. So was that $900,000 worth of overheads that were allocated to the golf course as post year-end adjustments?
Mr Lecoq?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Brenda Abrandis, another question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And just following up from the $900,000, is there an indication as to what the allocation and the breakup of the $900,000 represents?
Mr Lecoq?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's a full allocation of all city overheads, which would include the function of council, the office of the CEO, finance, information services, all other support services, even across other areas that draws into that area.
Thank you, Mr Lecoq. And Councillor Brenda Abrandis?
Yeah, thank you. Final question on the same net profit result. So for the allocation of overhead costs, so that was about $900,000 worth. Is there a methodology, or is it just a percentage, or is it based on a head count? Just trying to figure out how that cost was so significant.
Mr Lecoq?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There's no one single methodology that's applied. It's a tiered process, and it's based on, in principle, it's based on percentage costs applied, and then that is further dwindled down and then looked at costs in and out allocated, and then further determined at a next lower level in terms of that combined cost effect.
Thank you, Mr Lecoq. Any further questions, Councillor Brendan-Brandis?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Different number question, but it's to do with the same page and the statement that the city estimates that it would need to spend approximately 15 million over the next financial years to replace and improve the assets. Just with regard to the 15 million that's been identified there, so obviously there are certain capital costs that we need to incur, you know, things that actually require immediate replacement or, you know, short-term replacement. But with regard to the 15 million, there's obviously a fair component which is additional above and beyond the need. Could I just have a bit of feedback as to the $15 million and what would be identified to be the need, the necessary requirement for now as opposed to future spend?
Ms Anne Primo, can I send that one in your direction?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Councillor Brendan-Brandis, the 15 million is consistent with the kind of calculations that we used when we were looking at the RAF business case. And it also considers the future of golf and the demand for services there, and is linked to the maintaining an income base. So in addition to the existing facilities that are there that are no longer fit for purpose, the primary other expenditure will be on the driving range, which is significantly underutilised when it's either wet or hot weather and has the capacity to provide more function. So the modelling that has been done takes into consideration that capital investment and the income. So that is how we've considered the investment, and that was consistent with how we looked at the golfing component for the RAF. So we did extensive work at the time of the RAF on modelling what the optimal investment was in the golf course component.
Thank you, Ms Anne Primo. Councillor Brendan-Brandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Ms Anne Primo. Probably a final question just with regard to the same number. Would it be possible to get a breakup as to what would be replacement repairs versus new or renewal type assets, just to have a bit of categorisation as to what the allocations are on the 15 million?
Ms Anne Primo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. We could provide you with a breakdown. However, in the interests of not spending money unnecessarily, the 15 million is an estimate based on previous work that has been done. In the interim, costs have increased. So we have used some broad estimates as to reach that 15 million, whether the actual number is 14 million or 16 million or thereabouts. That is an indicative cost. So whilst there is some more detailed calculations has been done previously, probably 2 or 3 years ago now, and some of it would have been linked to our last building condition audit, which I think Mr Lecoq might correct me, but I think that's 4 years ago now, 5 years ago, yeah. So some of that data is historical, and we haven't rerun that because we don't believe it's necessary to have that level of accuracy for the purpose of decision making.
Thank you, Ms Anne Primo.
Thank you all. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the officer recommendation? Councillor Choi?
No, I'm fine.
Sorry, I missed that. What was, Councillor Choi, could you repeat that, sorry?
No, I'm fine, thanks, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Is there anyone who wishes to speak in favour of the officer recommendation? All right. Councillor Navard.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Look, the only thing I would say is we know we're on a quite a long journey here. I think one of the strengths of the beginning of this journey is the fact that we've got input from a provider who has a very strong commercial background and a variety of other locations. And I guess for us, our work is to become cautious and diligent in relation to the material that is presented for us as we go along. So, I mean, why would anyone try and put obstructions in the way of the beginning of a project. Thank you.
Thanks. And just for clarity, were you speaking for or against or general observation?
I was speaking in favour.
All right, thank you. All right, is there anyone who hasn't already spoken who would like to speak either for or against the officer recommendation? Councillor Choi?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
All right. Councillor Coveney, I don't think anyone actually spoke against. Is there anything that you'd wish to say?
No, there's nothing further, thank you.
All right. So, councillors, we're putting the officer recommendation on item 10.4.4 to the vote. Please cast your votes. And Councillor Choi, how do you vote?
Yes.
All right. And I think I'm just waiting for one more vote. Governance, who are you missing? Councillor Coveney? Thank you so much. All right, that was unanimous. Thank you all. So, moving on to the next item to be withdrawn for discussion this evening. That is item 10.4.5. It is entitled Policy P669, Elected Member Continuing Professional Development. The reason why this has been pulled out is an absolute majority is required. I haven't received any amended motions or alternative motions. Would anyone like to move the officer recommendation? Councillor Coveney, thank you. Someone to second? Councillor Brenda-O'Brandis, thank you. Does anyone oppose this item? Councillor Choi?
No, I'm fine.
All right. If no one opposes, then I'll use my powers under the standing orders to declare this item carried unanimously, which satisfies the requirement for an absolute majority. That brings us to item 10.5.3, which is the City of South Perth 2022/2023 Annual Financial Report. This item, I believe, has been withdrawn by one of the elected members for discussion tonight. I've not received any alternative motions. I've not received any amended motions. We do have an officer and a committee recommendation before us. Would anyone like to move the officer and committee recommendation? Councillor Coveney, thank you. Someone to second? Councillor Brenda-O'Brandis, thank you. It has been withdrawn, so I assume someone's at least got a question. Councillor Coveney, the floor is yours.
There's nothing further, Mayor, thank you.
All right, thank you. Councillor Brenda-O'Brandis, anything to say, seconder?
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. It's a good result, it's a great outcome. All credit to the administration. I actually withdrew this item as I had a question, but we managed to answer the same question in the previous item that we discussed. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Well, in that case, I'll just ask if anyone opposes this item. Councillor Choi?
No, that's good.
All right, then it having been moved and seconded and no one's indicated that they intend to oppose, I'll declare this item carried unanimously. Thank you all. And then we'll move on to the last item to be withdrawn tonight for item 10 of the agenda at least, which is item 10.5.5, policy review. There's an officer recommendation and a committee recommendation before us. I understand that Councillor Cridland has an amended motion that he'd like to move on that. So to get to Councillor Cridland's amended motion, first I'll ask if someone would like to move the officer recommendation. I'll do it for the sake of getting the ball rolling. Would someone like to second? Councillor D'Souza, thank you. I have nothing in particular to say. I was happy with the officer recommendation and committee recommendation, but I do understand that Councillor Cridland has a minor amended motion, which I'm very happy to hear. Councillor D'Souza, anything to say by way of seconder?
Nothing further, Mr Mayor.
All right. Councillor Cridland, I'll throw to you. Perhaps you can tell us what the amended motion you'd like to move is.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Sorry, I've got a small preamble. I apologise. I said earlier in the meeting it wouldn't be my only apology. This is my second apology. I hope it's my only one because I haven't shown courtesy to the council by providing this in writing earlier. So I do apologise to everyone. What I would like to move by way of amendment, subject to there being a seconder, is if you have a look at the officer recommendation on page 66, my amendment is to make one change to the second paragraph there by deleting one line out of policy P110, support of community and sporting groups. And the one line that I seek to remove is found on the attachments at page 194. It's the last dot point under the heading of self-supporting loan, and that dot point reads, loan amount per applicant cannot exceed $500,000. That is the one line that I would seek to remove from the policy review of any of the policies, subject to there being a seconder.
All right. Governance, is that amendment in a form that we can? Excellent. Would someone like to second? Councillor Coveney? Yes. Just had to make sure you hadn't moved or seconded the original motion. Councillor Quidland, the floor is yours.
All Border House. Thank you for taking my oral amendment. And the purpose of my amendment is similar to a question I asked quickly in passing during audit and governance, and it relates to simply making sure that the policy, which is now much more detailed and comprehensive, remains good into the future. We are currently in a high inflation or relatively high inflation period, in particular in respect of construction and building costs. And my intention is to remove a cap on self-supporting loans that may become increasingly less relevant as inflation eats into it. There have been a number of self-supporting loans that sporting groups and community groups in the city have previously taken out, some because they wanted to, some because they had to. For example, the South Perth Lawn Tennis Club was moved by decision of the council from down next to the zoo to behind Penrose, which cost the club a lot of money to do, a move that they didn't want to do. And the club took out a self-supporting loan via the city to help fund their new building and their new club down there, and they're doing well. What removing this dot point does is simply allows that figure to remain relevant over time in case we get another club, whether it's the Bridge Club or the Croquet Club or a community group who wishes to seek an amount of money to help them with their needs in respect of a community facility, and we can then provide the greatest capacity to assist and not be inadvertently hamstrung by a cap that we inserted tonight. That's the reasoning, and thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. Councillor Coveney, you're the seconder. Would you like to speak to this item?
Nothing further, thank you.
All right. I have no objection in principle, but I will ask a question. Perhaps it's to Ms Shaw. I understand the intent of Councillor Cridland's amended motion, but given it is a new amended motion, I feel I should just ask if the administration has any particular views or any particular objections to this amended motion.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. No, we have no objection because the city would consider whether the organisation has the demonstrated capacity to make the loan repayments in any instance.
That satisfies me. Thank you. Councillor De Souza, I see a hand raised there.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got a question. So is this totally abolishing the 500k cap and not replacing it with any additional cap?
Ms Shaw? Or Councillor Cridland, perhaps?
Sorry. Yes, it is removing a cap of $500,000. It's not replacing it with anything else.
Thank you. Is there any... Oh, Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a question. Regardless of this amendment, this would need to come before council anyway to make a decision. Is that correct?
Ms Shaw?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Councillors, is there anyone who wishes to speak against the amended motion? Councillor Choi?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I've got a question. I'm just wondering if Councillor Cridland would accept an amendment to his amendment in that he keeps the wording the same, but then maybe adds a comma unless otherwise approved by council, because it's got to come to council anyway. I'm just wondering, that would then provide still some certainty on a cap existing, I think, as Councillor Brenda Brandis, Councillor Brenda Brandis and Councillor De Souza just mentioned.
Councillor Choi, the standing orders provide that it's not possible to move another amendment while an amended motion is in play. If Councillor Cridland wanted to amend his amended motion, he is welcome to do so, but in the absence of that, we would need to resolve this amended motion, and then if someone else wanted to move a further amended motion, they could, but absent Councillor Cridland changing his amended motion, then we must deal with the current amended motion before we can deal with another one.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So, is there anyone who wishes to speak either for or against the amended motion? Councillor Prendeville.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to make a comment that I think what this does is responds to the current economic climate and also possible future climates. And as it's been said, each applicant will be assessed individually, and so this sort of frees us up to tying into any possible cap, but doesn't necessarily guarantee clubs, exorbitant amounts of money. So I think it's a really smart move. Thank you.
So I take that that's in favour of the amended motion. Excellent. Is there anyone who wishes to speak? Councillor De Souza, and perhaps let us know if you're speaking for or against.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll be speaking against the amendment. I understand what Councillor Cridland is aiming at. There certainly has been an increase in construction costs. I think a better way to approach it would have been to add a CPI factor. So every year the 500K goes up by CPI. I think it is a massive decision to just remove the cap altogether and just leave it uncapped. I think that is a decision of gravity, and I think the fact that we've only received the reasons now, I don't think is a good look for due process. So while I understand the intent, I support the intent. Costs have gone up. Removing a $500,000 cap without any further cap or any further CPI adjustment, I think is the wrong approach.
Thank you, Councillor De Souza. I might ask a question at this point of Ms Shaw. I apologise, I think it's repeating what Councillor Brenda Brandis has already asked, but I just want to make sure I've understood correctly. If there was a situation where there was an applicant seeking a self-supporting loan from the city under this policy, any such self-supporting loan, would that go to council, or is there a threshold where it could be approved by, say, delegated legislation?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. It would need to go to council. It might help if I clarify why that provision was included in the first instance, and it's effectively to set some parameters to the organisations about what the city considers would likely be appropriate for them to undertake a loan given they're a community organisation. But in any instance, like I said, we would still consider whether they had the demonstrated capacity to support the loan.
All right, and not wanting to labour the point, but, Mr Lecoq.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I just want to add to that point is that all loans needs to be approved by council, and it has to follow a public notice process, if not adopted through the budget. So even self-supporting loans needs to follow that process.
Thank you both very much. In that case, I'll speak in favour of the amended motion. I think Councillor De Souza very vigilant and making sure that the finances of the city are protected. That's good, that's laudable. But based on what Ms Shaw and Mr Lecoq have had to say, it seems that there's no ability for a self-supporting loan to be granted to a sporting club under this policy without it first being advertised, without it first coming to council and being specifically considered by this council. So that seems to me to be a pretty good handbrake on perhaps loans being made without the visibility of this council. And to my mind, it does in fact make the clause that Councillor Credland has identified for deletion, that does make me think that that clause was perhaps a little bit redundant to begin with. So with that, I'll be voting in favour of the amended motion. Is there anyone else who would like to speak either for or against who hasn't already spoken?
I've got a couple of questions.
Fire away.
Please, thank you. Look, I agree with what everyone has said so far this discussion. So my questions are, how many self-supporting loan applications does the city receive on average each year? And would removing this cap place any sort of additional burden on the administration in terms of looking at applications?
Who should I direct that to? Mr. Lecoq?
In the last 4+ years that I've been employed at the city, we haven't received one application.
Thank you. Any next question, Councillor Choi?
Yes, thank you through the chair to Mr. Lecoq. I think that probably answers my second question, which is like, would this add any extra administrative burden? So we wouldn't expect some sort of floodgate type. Now, if we remove a cap, we're going to get all these people wanting, $1 million self-funded loans. That's all to make sure of.
Sorry, is that a question or an observation?
No, it's just a question.
Okay, Mr. Lecoq?
Mr. Mayor, can the question be repeated, please?
Yes. Councillor Choi, could you please repeat that question?
Thank you. We wouldn't be expecting some sort of increase in applications if the cap was removed. I'm just trying to work out if there's any other implications to removing the cap.
Mr. Lecoq, I will forward that your way, but if there's been no applications, I would have thought that even one would have been an increase, but perhaps you might be able to answer that better.
I well and truly can't add much, but I would say that I don't think the cap would be an hindrance. A community group would have a need and they would identify the need, they would put in an application. But the city does not have an exorbitant amount of community groups that would be able to apply for loans in any event.
Thank you, Mr. Lecoq. Any further questions, Councillor Choi?
No, that's fine. Therefore, I'll support Councillor Credland's amendment.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone else who hasn't spoken on this amended motion who would like to speak either for or against? No? Councillor Credland, anything to say by way of winding up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. They are rare, but they exist. They are the little unicorns that we have that are so important. There have been a number of groups that have built their own facilities on council land and that are very important parts of our community. We can think of WASPs, who built their first facility down at Coma Reserve. Then we've got the Bridge Club, who built their building where they've played their bridge, and you're told to shut up if you try and speak while they're playing. At least that's my experience. You've got the South Perth Tennis Club, who had to build a new building when the council moved them. So it happens. And there may be other occasions. We've got leaky roofs down at the Collier Park golf course. Who knows? Perhaps even Mr. Scott's group could want to take out a loan to repair their roof. It just provides an opportunity for community groups, if they qualify under the incredibly rigorous provisions which have now been put in to replace what was almost nothing by way of guidance in this policy review. But we also need to be realistic, and the amounts of money that had previously been taken out would probably exceed this amount of $500,000. There had been no cap ever set before, and it's appropriate that we continue at council to be diligent and consider the requirement of a community group. How that requirement came about, for example, is it a council decision? If we move a group, maybe that would be something we'd take into account as well. Not just their ability to pay, but clearly their financial capacity is an important part of this policy. I commend this to you. I don't think it will have any impact on this policy, which has greatly increased guidance and the regulatory framework about loans. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Councillor Cridland. So, councillors, I'm about to put Councillor Cridland's amended motion to the vote, and depending on how that vote goes, I'll then go back to the substantive motion. So, councillors, please cast your votes on Councillor Cridland's amended motion. And how would you like to vote, Councillor Choi?
Yes.
All right. So, Councillor Cridland's amended motion has been carried 8 votes to 1. For those who are listening via YouTube, those in favour were Councillor Cridland, Councillor Waugh, Councillor Brenda Abrandis, myself, Mayor Milner, Councillor Coveney, Councillor Choi, Councillor Navard and Councillor Prendeville. Those against were Councillor D'Souza. So, we now go back to the amended substantive motion before us, which is the officer recommendation and the committee recommendation as amended by Councillor Cridland's amended motion. Is there anyone who wishes to speak either for or against the amended substantive motion? Councillor Choi?
No.
All right, and because it's getting late in the evening, I'll just explain. So what we're voting on right now, what we're debating, I should say, what we're currently debating is the officer recommendation and the committee recommendation appearing on page 66 of the agenda, but with that amendment to policy P110, support of community and sporting groups, identified by Councillor Cridland, deleting that little clause there. That's where we are now. So now that we've clarified that, I'll just give everyone one more chance if they want to speak either for or against. No, Councillor Choi, definitely nothing to say?
No, I'm fine with it, thank you.
Brilliant. Okay. So that brings it back to me because I was the original mover of the officer recommendation and the committee recommendation. I've got nothing further to say. I think that Councillor Cridland's amended motion has improved the officer recommendation and the committee recommendation, and there's nothing else for me to rebut. So I'll simply put the amended substantive motion to the vote. And Councillor Choi, how would you like to vote?
Yes.
All right, so that was unanimous. Thank you all. I think that might have been the last item on item 10. Yes, it is. Brilliant. All right, so we move on to item 11, which is applications for a leave of absence. Does anyone have a leave of absence application that they'd like to submit? Councillor Navard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I would like to apply for a leave of absence from the 29th of December to the 23rd of January, please.
23rd of January, and that's inclusive, I presume? Yes. Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to apply for a leave of absence? I think Councillor Cridland was a half second quicker. Councillor Cridland.
Yes, I apply for 2 leaves of absence. Firstly, 23rd of January to the 26th of January, inclusive. That's of 2024. And also the 19th of February, 2024 to the 1st of March, 2024.
All right, inclusive in both cases?
Yes.
All right, I'll just read that both back to you to make sure I've scribbled them down okay. So that's, you're asking for the 23rd of January 2024 through to the 26th of January 2024, and also for 19th February 2024 to the 1st of March 2024.
Correct.
Thank you. Councillor Prendeville.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to apply for January the 25th, 2024 until January 31st, 2024, please.
January 31st. Inclusive?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to apply for a leave of absence? Going, Councillor Choi?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
All right, gone. In that case, so correct me if I've got this wrong, but I'm about to call for a mover and a seconder that the following leave of absence applications be granted. Firstly, for Councillor Jennifer Navard for the period of 29 December 2023 to 23 January 2024 inclusive. Have I got that right, Councillor Navard? Thank you. For Councillor Credland, for the periods of 23 January 2024 to 26 January 2024 inclusive, as well as 29 February 2024 and 1 March 2024 inclusive. I've got that correct? No. No?
Sorry, 19 February to 1 March,
Oh, what did I say?
29, I think.
Ah, my bad. So for Councillor Credland, I'll start again. The 23rd of January 2024, I apologise, it's getting late, I'm getting tired, to 26 January 2024 and 19 February 2024 to the 1st of March 2024 inclusive. And for Councillor Prendeville, for 25 January 2024 to 31 January 2024 inclusive. Could I have a mover for that, please? Councillor Coveney, thank you. Councillor Brenda Abrandis to second. Does anyone oppose these leave of absence applications? Councillor Choi?
No, that's all good.
No. Well, if there's no one opposing, I'll declare that carried. Using my powers under the standing orders, that's been carried unanimously. Thank you all. Item 12 is motions of which previous notice has been given. That's nil. Item 13 is questions from members, and item 13.1 is responses to previous questions from members taken on notice. Responses to questions from members taken on notice at the November 2023 Ordinary Council meeting can be found in the appendix of this agenda. That brings us to item 13.2, which is questions from members. Are there any questions from members this evening? Councillor Prendeville, or if you've got your light on. No worries at all. It's I used to do it all the time. Well, are there any questions from members? Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've just got a couple of questions with regard to the My South Perth publication that was released a couple of weeks ago. So it's with regard to the Cockatoo article on page 14. So yeah, this article
I'll take that on notice, Councillor Brenda Brandis. I don't have a copy of the publication in front of me and I'd need to take further advice on that.
Thank you. Second question, Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. With regard to the pine trees, do we actually have a planting program actually in place, and are we actually actively replacing pine trees?
Ms Amprimo, is that your department as well?
We monitor the pine trees to see where they are in relation to their end of life, and we have had previous reports on them. We replace trees with species that are appropriate to the circumstance at the time, so we don't have a blanket position on one way or another.
Thank you. Councillor Brenda Brandis.
Yeah, so thank you. So just to clarify, do we have any planting program for the pine trees themselves, and if so, how many have we planted maybe over the last few years, 2-3 years?
Ms Amprimo.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd need to take that level of detail on notice.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brenda Brandis, or
Yes.
have you just still got the light on?
Yeah, no, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I still have another question on the same article, different part of the article. So it refers to pine and macadamia provide a very fat-rich food that can lead to the birds becoming too heavy to take off the ground quickly, contributing to frequent bird injuries and fatalities from predator attacks and collisions with cars. I'm just wondering, that's a very important piece of information. Is there any research that could be provided to me as to where that has come from? Because I am quite passionate about cockatoos, and I haven't actually seen that as being a piece of important research.
Ms Amprimo.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, I'll take that on notice and refer it back to the officer who wrote the article.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any further questions for the administration this evening, councillors?
Yes.
I'll go to Councillor Choi first, then I'll go. Yep. And your next question, Councillor Choi.
Yep, thank you through the chair to Ms Amprimo. So my other question is about the shelter and bench seat outside Coles. I understand when I last inquired about this, a request had been sent to Windsor Night regarding the reinstatement of the shelter and bench seat. I'm just wondering where we're at with that, please.
Just to clarify, you're talking about a bus shelter or a park bench, or when you say the
So
shelter
when the
outside
Coles
Coles, I assume you mean Angelo Street?
Yeah, Angelo Street Coles. So when that development was constructed, apparently the shelter and bench that was there prior to construction was meant to be reinstated after construction, and apparently the city has requested Windsor to reinstall it. So I'm just wondering, it's not there yet. I'm just wondering if there's a status update that can be provided to council on that, please, because residents have asked and local businesses have asked for that to be reinstated.
Ms Ambremo?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Choi, perhaps you could send me your question in writing because I'm not entirely clear what your question is. So if you send it to me in writing, I'll be able to provide a response.
Thank you, Ms Ambremo. Any further questions, Councillor Choi?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
All right. I think I said I'd go to Councillor Navard next, and then I'll come back to Councillor Brenda Abrandis.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Following on from the City of Melville's initiative at Bigton Baths, some members of the community have expressed an interest in where the City of South Perth might be in a position that would allow the old Preston Street jetty area to be repurposed as a shark-proof swimming area. It would certainly offer a beachy feel to the area, as this had been the case in the past. And so I was just wondering if that was a plausible plan.
Ms Ambremo, should I send that your way?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Navard, for your question. The water conditions in the Como Beach area are exposed to adverse wind and wave conditions, and the depth of the water is also relatively shallow in that area, so it wouldn't make it a particularly desirable place to make for a swimming area. The water that's immediately around the jetty is deeper. However, that jetty is owned by the Department of Transport. So we would need to speak with both the Department of Transport and DBCA around any proposal there. But it's a very different location to the one in Melville in terms of suitability, and we wouldn't consider it a particularly desirable location.
Thank you, Ms Ambremo. Councillor Brenda Abrandis?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one more final question with regard to the Cockatoo article. So we've undertaken great initiatives with the watering stations, so the refilling water stations, high off the ground, so to avoid predators. Are we planning any more of those? And if so, are we planning those sort of strategically around the city to actually ensure that they've got water over these longer and drier summers?
Ms Ambremo?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. The only other location that we have identified at the moment is to install one on the South Perth Foreshore Hurlingham Living Stream. The locations are dependent on us having a freshwater supply in proximity of where we would locate them. So that is what we primarily look at. We have installed a number across the city where we have locations.
Thank you, Ms Ambremo. Any further questions for the administration, councillors? Councillor Navard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is somewhat of a frivolous question, but it is that some community members have displayed disappointment that the street trees at the western end of Angelo Street shopping strip are not lit up. Would the city please explain why this end of the shopping strip missed out on the bling treatment?
Who should I send that to, folks, or does that need to be taken on notice? Ms Ambremo?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. When the works were done to upgrade the pavement surface in that area, it became apparent that a number of the electrical fittings for the lighting on the trees had failed. We are not able to replace them immediately. However, we are looking to put something for council's consideration in the 24-25 annual budget.
Thank you, Ms Ambremo. Any further questions for the administration, councillors? Councillor Choi?
Yeah, I did have one, but now I've forgotten what it was. I think it was following on from Councillor Navard. Oh, yeah, question about Christmas lights. Is that the same response in relation to Christmas lights, or is that a budget allocation consideration we might need to consider next budget round of talks next year?
Ms Ambremo?
The Angelo Street precinct as well. well. And also Main Street. I'm not sure about the Christmas lights situation on Main Street, but all the precincts, Preston Street. Is there more that can be done for Christmas lights in the district? Because people are asking about it, and they are saying that that's maybe one of the reasons why people don't come in the evening.
Sorry, Councillor Choi, I might just get you to summarise your question. I got a bit lost there. Could you restate your question, please?
Yes, please. Is the city looking, or can the city consider as part of the budget talks, increase Christmas lights throughout the district in all the major precincts?
Thank you. Ms Amprimo, is that one I should send your way?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you, Councillor Choi, for the question. The city currently has $30,000 allocated in the budget for Christmas lights. That is all fully allocated to erecting the lights and taking them down from the tree at next to the old mill and at Coode Street, and also the lights that are in Preston Street and in I'm thinking that they're in Manning area as well, and Welwyn Ave. So if we were to expand the Christmas lights, we would be seeking further budget for that.
Thank you, Ms Amprimo. Any other questions, councillors? No. Okay. That brings us to item 14, which is new business of an urgent nature introduced by decision of the meeting. That is nil this evening. Item 15 is ordinarily when we would close the meeting to the public if there was any need to do so, but there is no need to do so this evening. Which brings us to item 16, which is closure. So before I close this meeting, I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance and participation. I'd particularly like to wish all of you, all of the city staff and our community at large a very Merry Christmas and a happy, safe and prosperous 2024. Thank you all. I declare this meeting closed at 9:34 p.m. Thank you all and good night.